All rise. The court is now in session. Judge Newman presiding. Be seated.
Good morning. I want to remind everyone in the courtroom that the courtroom decorum must be maintained at all times. You're not allowed to react to any testimony, cheer, jeer, nor speak in the courtroom unless it's during the time I said, let's take a stretch break. And you can speak at that time, but otherwise we need to maintain order. Anything before the jury comes?
From state, Your Honor.
Your Honor, a couple of sort of housekeeping matters. One is we expect to rest today. We've got 3 witnesses. I don't know how they could go all day, but direct ought to be relatively quick. We're going to rest today, I believe, and then the state is going to call several somewhere. We've been told up to 4. Maybe it's 5, maybe it's 6, but whatever. I think there's a high likelihood that they will rest on their reply case by tomorrow afternoon, Wednesday morning.
Tomorrow afternoon, I believe we can get done and be on track to close and charge on Wednesday, Your Honor.
With this caveat, and so what we would ask is that you ask the jury if they want to do that. I know I wouldn't, if they don't want to do it, I don't want them to do it. If they want to do it, that'd be fine with me, and it needs to be done in an expeditious way. And obviously, Your Honor's dealt with this before. I don't know what, we're not going with them, but I don't know who does go with them. No one's obviously going to be able to answer questions. They can see it. And that's, I don't know whether that should take any more than, Roselle's about 30 minutes from here? 40 minutes from here. So that's 40 there, 40 back. An hour on the scene, maybe 3 hours. And I just throw that into the mix, not wanting to get this case closed, but we believe they ought to be given the opportunity to ask to see it if they want to see it. And I don't know whether that's done by majority vote. I don't know how all that's done, but we're asking they be allowed to do that if they want to do it.
Your Honor, I don't know that I've heard of just asking the jury and having them take a vote on that. The state is not asking for there to be a jury view of the scene, and if anything, I think that that would require additional testimony because the scene is different than it existed on the night of June 7th, 2021. And a big factor, which I think is very relevant to some of the issues here, is that the trees that were planted that separate the kennels and the house are markedly taller and thicker than they were on June 7th. The state is not asking that there be a jury view, and I don't think the defense is either, and I'm not aware of any procedure where we just kind of throw it into the jury's hands to take a vote. So we would object to that proposal.
Your Honor, if Your Honor wanted to instruct them, they're only there to see the kennels. There's no issues. They should be viewing the house, or because the scene is, we concede that that's changed. But the kennels, the spatial, how small the feed room is, the spatial between where, and they've seen the pictures, where the feed room is compared to where Maggie's body was, compared to where the quail pens are, where the doghouse is. You just can't really appreciate the spatial issues without actually seeing them. And if you want to limit it to just the kennels and them not being allowed to in any way deal with the relationship between the house and the, and we actually do have some photos from that night and the next day. I think you can put restrictions on it that would assist the jury if they want it. I don't know whether they vote or whether you ask the forelady. I've seen it done where the judge asks the jury, do you want to go to the scene? Now, it's been a while. I can't remember whether it was a vote, but he did ask the jury. It was sometime in the dark ages of the early 80s.
And we certainly would object to putting any sort of vote to the jury at this point in time. I've never heard of any such a thing. Generally, jury views are at the request of a party, and
I'm requesting.
If either side wants the jury view, the court will arrange a jury view, and the court will go, the lawyers may go if you want to go. Of course, there are so many lawyers. That's a mammoth team in of itself. And I can advise the jury as part of the going to the scene that the certain things may not be the same as they were 2 years ago, whenever the period of time was. So if the defense wants a jury view, then the court will arrange a jury view.
Your Honor, thank you. And I just bring this to the court's attention. There were literally dozens of people at Moselle last weekend trespassing to get selfies in front of the feed room. I mean, most distasteful kinds of things I've ever seen. So perhaps before they head out there, some of the security could be in place, and so they
We'll have
don't.
law enforcement security scene, ensure that no one is there.
Well,
Unless, yeah.
John Marvin, his brother, is maintaining that property. He had to call the sheriff's department to come remove him, and it seems they have they're sort of a carnival attitude about this case than what we have to deal with. So I don't want the jury influenced by, crazy paparazzi. I don't think there's really any.
No one can be there. The scene will be secure. No one will be there during a jury view. Now, do you want a jury view? Does the defense want a jury view?
I do. I just want to ensure that the security is not caught unawares about what a circus is going to be outside the property. And they've got the authority to close off the road. Yeah. So, I mean, I'm not telling them how to do their job, but I am suggesting these are things that we became aware of over the weekend.
All right. We'll arrange for a jury view with law enforcement. All right. Anything else?
No, Your Honor.
Hey, you may bring the jury. All right, thank you. Good morning. Good morning. Okay, welcome back once again, day number 25. The defense's case, you may proceed.
Court, Your Honor. The defense would call Dr. Jonathan Eisenstadt to the stand, please. And Your Honor, while he's coming around, Dr. Eisenstadt's a pathologist. We're going to be, first of all, showing some pretty graphic photos on the computer and the Elmo. And secondly, we're going to be talking about some pretty graphic details. So we will be offering exhibits. We should, we don't have to do it out of the gate, but certainly 10 minutes into his testimony, we're going to be showing some pictures and discussing matters that are going to be pretty graphic. So a number of these exhibits, not all of them, but 90% of them, we're going to move to introduce under seal. Some of them are already introduced under seal. And we've warned the family that if it gets too graphic, they can leave. So if Your Honor sees some of the Murdaughs get up walking out, that would be because it's, again, extremely graphic. So,
Raise your right hand. Stand by. Do you affirm the testimony about to give the court in this trial shall be the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you. Take a seat in the witness stand. You can adjust the mic. Please state your name again for the record. Spell your last name.
Jonathan Eisenstadt, Eisenstadt.
Doctor, what do you do for a living?
I am a medical doctor who specializes in forensic pathology.
And where do you practice medicine?
In the state of Georgia.
Could you tell the jury, please, what forensic pathology is?
Sure. Forensic pathology is a subset of pathology which really deals with investigating the cause and the manner of someone's death.
Okay, and let's get a little bit of your history. So if, and I'm looking at this, you went to the same medical school as Dr. Reamer,
I did.
and then after, I think you went to University of California, Davis undergraduate?
That's correct. I grew up in California.
Graduated from there in '93. You went to the Sacra School of Medicine, as did Dr. Reamer, and you graduated in '98.
Yes, sir.
And then you did a residency where?
Well, when I came out of medical school, I initially wanted to be a surgeon. So I started out in general surgery in Staten Island, New York, and quickly realized it was not the profession I wanted. Beautiful profession, but not for me. So I transferred into a pathology program. This is all up in New York, out in Long Island. And to become a forensic pathologist, you first have to do what's called anatomic pathology, which is hospital-based pathology. If you've ever had anything taken out of your body, surgery or blood or anything, that goes to the pathology department. We look at it, we diagnose it, we tell your doctor, and your doctor will tell you what the diagnosis is. After doing all of that training, I did a year of pediatric pathology at New York University to study diseases of childhood. After that, I did a year of forensic pathology fellowship in the Office of Chief Medical Examiner in New York City, and then stayed on one more year in New York City as a medical examiner or forensic pathologist while doing more training in forensic neuro and cardiac pathology.
And that would have been in 2000, well, that would have been through 2004.
Correct. My forensic pathology training started in 2004 to 2005, and then from 2005 to 2006, I did my forensic neuro and forensic cardiac training.
So would that have been with the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner of the city? Who would that have been with?
With the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner in New York City.
Okay, and how long did you do that?
Well, the forensic pathology was 1 year, the forensic neuro and cardiac was another year. So that's 2 total.
Okay. At some point, did you leave New York?
Yes, after I completed those forensic subspecialties, I was offered a job at the Georgia Bureau of Investigation in Atlanta. I accepted the job and moved to Atlanta in July of 2006.
Did the Georgia, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation have their own medical examiner?
Yes, so the state of Georgia, there are, Metro Atlanta has its own medical examiner offices. So there's Fulton County, Cobb, DeKalb, and Gwinnett. So 4 of the 159 counties in the state of Georgia has their own medical examiner.
Per county or total?
Per county.
Okay.
So 1 for each of those counties.
Okay.
And then the GBI, for short, covers the other 155 counties in the state. And when I first started there, there were, I believe, 5 or 6 offices. And then over time, it sort of shrunk down to 3 offices, and I was at the headquarters office in Atlanta.
So when you initially started with a medical examiner's office in Georgia, who did you start with?
So I was with the GBI as my full-time job.
Right.
But I did do some moonlighting pretty much at at the Fulton County office, the Cobb County office, and the DeKalb County office.
So those 3 counties they comprise the metropolitan area of what city?
Of Atlanta.
Okay, so, and is that a rather large metropolitan area?
Yes, that's why each one of those counties have their own freestanding medical examiner office.
But you did part-time work for all three?
Yes, and I actually still do now for Fulton County and then hopefully soon one of the other counties.
Okay, so, tell me about your work with the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, and how did that differ from what you were doing for these other counties?
So at the GBI, that was my full-time job.
What did you do, what was your job?
Oh, my job was as one of the workhorse pathologists doing, when I first started, I believe it was about 250 autopsies each year. And then as time went on, the caseloads increased. And so I would say I was doing anywhere between 250 to maybe 350 autopsies per year. I would be testifying in court. We had residents that would rotate, so the hospital pathology residents would rotate in our office. We would lecture, and then that went until 2014 when I was promoted to Deputy Chief Medical Examiner.
Okay, now, the autopsies you were doing, and would you generate reports for each one of those?
Absolutely.
And were these, you indicated early in your career you were doing general pathology, that is, if you had a polyp taken out during your colonoscopy, you would be doing those?
Yes, that's a requirement to be able to take the Forensic Pathology Fellowship and boards.
So at this stage in your career, when you're doing autopsies, typically, how did those folks expire?
So those are sudden, unexpected deaths, whether they are just, we don't know what happened. You know, a 45-year-old individual found dead in their residence. No one knows why they died. We would get those cases. But then, obviously, all of the traumatic and non-natural deaths would be investigated by the medical examiner. So anything from car accidents to gunshot wounds, stab wounds, fights and somebody died, things of that sort.
Okay. So you did autopsies on people who died of under traumatic circumstances,
Absolutely.
including gunshots?
Yes.
And now you just indicated promoted to Deputy Chief Medical Examiner for the GBI. How did that change your duties?
So that added a little bit of administrative duties. Thus, I sort of dropped back a little bit in the number of cases. So I probably at that time, I would be doing about 200 autopsies. That was just for 1 year until 2015. So maybe about 100 autopsies, but now I was overseeing other doctors, investigators, and then we have a unit at the GBI, which is called the Child Abuse Investigative Support Center. And so we would actually do, I oversaw it, but I wasn't the doctor in it. So I know that sounds a little weird, but the person who did most of the work in that was a doctor and an investigator. But as I moved up, you know, that sort of became under the umbrella of what I would oversee.
Were those child deaths or?
They were living consults and deaths. So district attorneys or CFR, the Child Protective Services from around the state may come and ask, hey, is this an accidental injury? Could the child have fallen off a bike, or is this abuse?
And did you review those cases?
A few of them, but really the vast majority was done by one of the other doctors.
Were you still reviewing death cases?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, so if somebody did an autopsy on somebody who died of trauma, would you review their findings and the evidence?
Well, I was doing plenty of autopsies still myself, and what we had started doing was we would do rounds on all of the bodies that were in the morgue in the morning, and so we would discuss them all. It really wasn't, and then in the afternoon, we would revisit all of those in a meeting and discuss, hey, does this look, if we're focusing on gunshots, do you think this is a contact, a close range, a distant range? If we're not sure about the directionality, we would discuss that. That wasn't specifically me, that was all the doctors. But then when I became chief, all of that became, the scheduling and the meetings would become my responsibility.
So, and after you were the deputy, what happened?
So then in November of 2015, I became the chief medical examiner for the state.
For the state of Georgia?
Yes, sir.
And were you continuing to do autopsies?
I did because I wanted to, I didn't want to lose my skills. So I did continue doing autopsies. At that time, I dropped down to about 100 autopsies that I
Per
personally
year?
performed per year. But I was now involved in more policy writing, administrative duties, going down to the legislature and lecturing, it was during the opioid epidemic. So there were a lot of things going on. But if there was a case that was very difficult, it's written in the policy of the GBI Medical Examiner's Office that the chief medical examiner was the final arbiter of those cases.
Okay. Now, you did that, you said, until January 22,
That's correct.
which would have been last year.
Yes, sir.
Now, have you been doing other things during that period of time in addition to being chief medical examiner?
Well, yes, I was doing some consulting work. I would do that at night and on the weekends, unless I, was in deposition, then I'd take personal leave to go do that. But those were the two main things I was doing.
Did you form a private consulting firm in 2008?
I did. Not in 2008. I started, my first consulting case was in 2008. It was a cardiac death in New York, and the ME's office in New York referred the attorney to me. But I don't believe I started my actual, business probably until about 2013 or 14.
Okay, I've misread this. So, tell us what that is called and what you do.
So that's called Eisenstadt Forensic Pathology. It's nothing fancy. And really what I do is an attorney or a family may call me, ask me to review a case or to perform a private autopsy. And if I have the time, I'll accept that. I'll look over the documents. I may do an autopsy if that's what the family's requested. And then if it's an autopsy, I'll tell the family what my findings were. And, I recently had one where I referred the family to I told them to go to their cardiologist and get tested because I believe the person had a genetic disease that could be transmitted to their offspring. If it's just a record review, I'll review the records and I will tell the attorney what my opinions are. If my opinions support what they are hoping, then I may hear back from them. If my opinions don't, I probably don't ever hear back from them.
So, did you have permission from the GBI to do that?
I did. While I was at the GBI, every single consult case that I did, I got written approval by my superior, who was the deputy director of the agency.
Now, have you ever been qualified to testify as an expert in the area of forensic pathology, especially in gunshot wounds, in any state or federal courts?
Yes, so throughout the state of Georgia, obviously. As far as gunshot wounds in other states, I've been qualified as an expert in forensic pathology in a number of states.
How many states have you been qualified to testify in as forensic pathologist? Just,
Probably in the area of 20, 25.
okay. And you've been qualified in the state of Georgia by both state and federal courts to testify about gunshot wounds specifically?
Yes, sir.
And have you done autopsies on people who are the victims of a shotgun wound?
Yes, sir.
Okay. You have any idea on how many occasions you've done that?
Oh, I'm sure myself, I've probably done, 75 to 100 or something to that effect, and then been involved in many more.
Okay. Tell me what the National Association of Medical Examiners is.
So that's actually the primary national organization that, every profession has their own national organization. And for us, for short, we call it NAME. NAME is really the main national organization for forensic pathologists. And they write position papers, we have annual meetings, there's a journal that comes through that organization. So it's the prime organization for forensic pathologists.
And do you enjoy any position with NAME?
I do.
What position or positions?
So I'm currently on the board of directors, and I sit on a few committees for name.
Okay. Now, you're licensed in the state of Georgia and New York?
Not New York anymore. When I left New York, I let my license lapse because I had a feeling I wasn't going back for quite a while. So currently, I'm licensed in Georgia.
Are you board certified
Yes, sir.
in forensic pathology?
Yes, sir.
And you've got a number of different articles and books, and you teach at what schools?
So I was teaching at Augusta University, and that's the medical school that the Forensic Pathology Fellowship Training Program that I started at GBI, they were the sponsoring agency. But I've lectured at St. Louis University at their master's course in death investigation. I've lectured all over the state of Georgia to law enforcement, to coroners.
How about Emory School of Medicine?
Yes, well, at Emory, we had residents and fellows that would rotate through the medical examiner's office in Fulton County, as well as actually GBI. So we would teach them as well.
Okay, Your Honor, I'd move to have Dr. Eisenstadt qualified as an expert in the area of forensic pathology.
Says the state.
No objection, Your Honor.
He's so qualified.
Okay, let me talk to you. Well, let's get to this before they get to it. Are you being paid for your when I say paid for your testimony, are you being compensated to evaluate and testify?
Yes, I'm being compensated for my work.
And how much are you being paid?
Up until this point, I've been paid $3,000. And then I have another invoice that will come out after trial, which will probably be a number of thousands of dollars. I don't recall exactly.
Okay, you compensated by the hour or by the task or what?
No, by the hour. So when I review documents, I charge $600 an hour. And then for testimony, I charge per day, so 24 hours, and that's $5,500 per the day.
Okay. So, and is that unusual for doctors who testify, consult and testify, or is that the normal practice?
In my field of forensic pathology, I've been told I actually undercharge, but if there's some that charge less than me, there's some that charge more than me.
Okay, I've got a number of topics I want to talk to you about today, but some testimony we had last week, I was going to say earlier this week, the weeks are beginning to mush together.
Objection, comments?
I'm sorry, Your Honor, I'm an old guy, I forget things. I'm not sure what week it was. I apologize to the court and the state for my faulty memory.
Yes, sir. You may proceed.
So, sometime, I believe last week, we heard from the coroner of Colleton County. Did you watch that testimony or hear that testimony?
Not the coroner. I saw Dr. Reimers, the medical examiners, but I did not see the coroners.
Okay, tell the jury, please, if a medical examiner or coroner comes on the scene of a suspected homicide, how would one, as a physician or medical examiner, how would one determine time of death? What procedure would you follow?
Oh, well, whether it be a homicide or not, any death scene, you want to try to get an idea. It's not an exact science, but you want to try to get an idea of what the body temperature is as compared to the ambient temperature.
Why?
Why? Because it can give you an idea of how long the body has been there, but there's a lot of factors. So the way that I always taught the investigators and coroners is if you walk into a room or you walk into an environment where there's a dead body, the first thing you do is put a thermometer down. Don't look at the thermostat on the wall. Don't look at the computer to see what it says. Put the thermostat down, look in the area, start your investigation. Come back and look at the thermometer. That will be your ambient temperature.
Ambient temperature means what?
The temperature of the air in that area.
Okay.
And obviously, you want to put it near where the body is. And then you take the thermometer and you do a rectal temperature. You put it in the rectum, but you leave it there and you start doing more of your scene investigation. Then you come back, you take it out, and then you have the closest to what we can get for a core body temperature. And you document those two. And then there's other things you look at. You look at blood settling, and you look at what's called rigidity, so stiffening of the muscles.
So why would you want a core temperature and an ambient temperature? What do you do with that?
Well, then you can, the body will equilibrate,
Well, what?
will sort of even out with the ambient, so the outside temperature, between 1 to 1.5 degrees per hour. I will say it's not an exact science, because obviously if, right now, I'm sure my body temperature is a little higher because I'm on the stand. So I may not be 98.6 degrees right now, which is normal.
And if you were to die right now, it would not be appropriate, I'm not saying you should die right now, but, so your temperature's up a little bit. Does that mean that you would start at in your calculations at a higher temperature? What would you do?
Right, so that's the problem, is that, let's say I'm 99.5 right now, so that's 1 degree higher. That already moved, we're starting to move that time frame out to it could have an hour faultiness to what you're going to do. So it's 100 degrees outside, my core body temperature is 99 degrees, so we have 1 degree difference. So you may say it's been about an hour, but unfortunately television shows have made it seem like you can say it happened at this time. But in all honesty, you can't, but by far the best methodology is to do a core body temperature.
And an ambient temperature.
And an ambient temperature, yes.
So tell me what you would learn by sticking your hand under the armpit of a deceased.
You wouldn't learn anything.
Really?
Well, you may learn that the arm can't come down because of rigidity, but as far as temperature, you have your own body temperature. You have, you're sticking it in an armpit, which is exposed to the ambient temperature. So that it's just not a valid method to try to make a determination of time of death.
Just a guess?
It's a guess, yes.
Okay. So let's talk a little bit about, we're going to be dealing with some sealed material. Is that TV off over there? What now? This? Right, so I'm just trying to make sure. I want to make sure this juror can see. Okay. So, at our request, we're Mr. Murdaugh's lawyers, did you examine materials in this case?
Yes, sir, I did.
And let me first of all ask you if you examined these two documents. Just the autopsy report. Oh, I'm sorry. Autopsy report. Okay. Your Honor, I'm showing the witness defendant's exhibit 177 and 178.
So 178, yes.
And tell us what that is.
That is the Medical University of South Carolina's autopsy file. So it's more than just the report. It's essentially the file for the medical examiner.
Okay. And you examined this.
Yes, sir, I did.
Okay. Go ahead. What's the next one?
So 177 I did examine, and this is the MUSC file for Maggie.
This being 177.
Yes, sir.
So Maggie's 177 and Paul is 178.
Yes, sir.
Your Honor, we would offer these into evidence.
Your Honor, the state would object to these documents coming into evidence.
I'm sorry, I don't understand the case.
Your Honor, Dr. Reamer testified to her reports. These are reports by Dr. Reamer. These are not reports generated by Dr. Eisenstadt. He has reviewed those reports, he can testify to the substance of those reports, but we would object to the reports themselves coming in as evidence.
Says the defense.
Your Honor, these are business records that are kept in the ordinary course of business according to Dr. Reamer. There's certainly nothing in here other than her findings, basically. So we'd object. I mean, these are what Dr. Reamer relied on, these documents. Certainly, under the business records exception, they would be admissible. I don't quite understand why the state would not want this jury to be able to see. I'm sorry.
The state has objected, so the argument is not why they would not want them.
Business records exception, I'm sorry.
I haven't seen the exhibit. I can't rule without seeing what they are. Admitted over objection.
We'll come back to these a little bit. I'm primarily interested in her determinations and some sketches she did that are in there, okay? So you examined her, her report, correct?
Yes, sir.
And, could I have the Elmo, please? Can I have the report? Let's talk about Maggie to begin with, okay?
Okay.
And I'm going to put this on the Elmo. Can you tell me what this is, please?
That's a standard body diagram for a female.
And you reviewed this?
Yes, sir.
Okay, let's put this on the Elmo. And could I have the easel, what? Oh, you can? Okay, so this would be the body sketches. Maggie. What do you see on your screen?
I see the female body diagram from the autopsy of Maggie Murdaugh.
Okay, so, let's, you know, if you could put it in that doorway up there.
Sure.
Show how the jury is seeing it better. Push it back, there you go. So, and let's put this on it. Okay, so by way of, let's walk through the wounds on Maggie, okay?
Okay.
So look at the sketch in front of you and walk the jury through. If you need to come down here with a pointer, or can you do it from up there, whatever's more convenient for you.
There's a lot of writing, so it may be easier for me to point it out. I don't know if this is a touch screen or not.
We had a pointer. We still have a pointer. She had a pointer, but that's okay. We'll do that. Okay, so what I want you to do is step down here, please. And I'd like you to stand so that those jurors over there can see, so you probably need to stand over there.
Sure.
Okay, so how about walk them, yeah, okay. Walk them through the wounds on Maggie, please.
So I think the easiest would be to go from bottom up.
Okay,
So we have, these are all rifle wounds. They're all caused by a rifle. We have an entrance wound on the left thigh, and the entrance wound on the left thigh has, on the diagram, little dots, which is stippling, which makes it an intermediate range rifle wound.
what does that mean, intermediate range?
We're talking up to 1 to 3 feet. The end of the barrel to the actual skin where the bullet goes through.
Okay,
And I agree with what's Dr. Reamer put here. That's the medial left thigh. Now we flip the body over and we have the, on the diagram, so this is now the left side, and we have the corresponding exit wound on the back of the left thigh. So I agree with the range of fire, the directionality, that it's an intermediate range rifle wound.
so you and Dr. Reamer agree?
Yes, we agree on this one.
Okay, next.
Moving up, we can go here to the torso. So we have another entrance rifle wound on the upper right torso. It's, as per, I obviously can't see the inside in this, but as per the autopsy, it goes through a number of organs, goes across, and comes out the bottom left back of the torso. And I agree with that, with her finding on that as well.
Let me interrupt you 1 second.
Yes, sir.
Prior to your agreement or disagreement, did you look at the autopsy photos?
Oh, absolutely.
Did you look at her report and her notes?
Absolutely.
Anything else you looked at?
I looked at some scene photos, and I believe that was it.
Okay, but you're relying on her photos?
Yes, the most important for me is the autopsy report, the autopsy diagram, and the autopsy photos.
Okay. Okay, I'm sorry, go to the next one.
Okay, so we now have, we've talked about 1 gunshot wound, a rifle wound, 2 rifle wounds. Now we have a rifle wound on the left wrist and forearm. We have an entrance on the back of the left wrist, which is the dorsal surface, and this is the ventral or volar surface. And the exit is on the volar left forearm. I agree with that as well. On the, oh, I'm sorry, I also looked at x-rays. That was
Okay.
part of the photos. On the x-ray, there are some little fragments of, you can tell it's a rifle round in the left wrist.
And it went through?
It went through, yes.
And entrance on which side?
On the back of the left wrist.
Okay, next.
So we've now talked about 3 of them. Now we have 2. I'll start with the first one, which I agree with her findings, and then the second one is where I have, there's a discrepancy. So if we now look at rifle wound E, which is the one that's here on the back of the head,
Yes.
the directionality is correct, and I can explain why I believe the one on the left breast, the directionality was wrong. But we have a almost tangential, meaning that it doesn't go super deep into the brain, it comes here, but a rifle has a lot of kinetic energy and so it has a lot of force to it, and it can cause severe disruption. And it's coming along here, goes through the brain, and when this one goes through the brain, it causes an injury to the brainstem. That would make her die immediately. So this one came here, and then, which is the entrance on the back right of the head,
And that's labeled what?
that's labeled E.
Okay.
And then you can see on the x-ray, there's a little fragment, or a few little fragments in the head. And so a rifle round will fragment, we call it a lead snowstorm. It sort of on x-ray looks like a snowstorm, a bunch of little white pieces. It breaks up, pieces of projectile come through, down into the back, and continue down into the right chest. So this is, now remember we're talking about directionality, this is top, this is bottom. And so on the body, it's going downwards, but obviously we have a moving situation, so if she's like this, it may have been coming straight, but on the body, the directionality is downwards. And there are some up arrows here on the injuries to the upper back. I don't know why, because in her report, they go down. So that's all part of gunshot or rifle wound E. That's actually the lethal rifle wound,
Okay.
immediately lethal. And now I'll focus on A, C, and then the abrasion or the graze wound of the abdomen. And this is where I differ in opinion of directionality.
So you agree with her on everything except this one?
On Maggie, that's correct.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. So if we look at the autopsy photos, that's going to be extremely important.
We will in a minute.
Okay. So we do have a wound on the left breast. We do have a wound on the left chin. And we do have this abrasion under the left breast. And sometimes there are characteristics that we look for to try to give us directionality of these superficial gunshot or rifle wounds. And what you're looking for when it's a tangential wound is you're looking for skin tags. So
Tell me what a skin tag is.
sure. So if you think about it, if a bullet is coming and it hits the skin, and you can see how it's pushing the skin like this, so you're going to get these tears in the skin. And the tears in the skin are going to be in the direction that the bullet's coming. But if you let that go, between those two tears is a triangular piece of tissue left, right? So we have a tear over here, we have a tear over here, and then you let it go and you have a skin tag. You have a piece of tissue pointing in the direction that the bullet came from. And so when I look at the picture of the rifle wound to the back of the head, you can see all of those skin tags are pointing up this way, so the bullet came here. When I look at the left breast, and I look at the wound to the left side of the head, or excuse me, the left chin or jaw, I see skin tags pointing this way. So that would make this rifle wound come from here. It would be superficial, but remember we have all of that kinetic energy, so that's why we get the splitting of the skin, the fracture of the chin, then it comes down through the breast, and then it grazes the upper left chest. And it sort of makes sense when you think about it. If a person is leaning forward and you've got one going down this way, you've got another one going essentially in the same exact direction. So there's the scientific aspect by looking at the actual outline or the actual look of the wound. And then you also have two wounds from a rifle that are right next to each other going in the same direction.
And you indicate that both of the directions of both of those, one that goes down this way to the, and severs the brainstem, and then the other one that goes down and through her breast. I mean, unless somebody were very, very tall, is there an explanation on how those wounds would have come about?
Yes, so I mean, really, we know it's coming from the top of the head downwards, right? So unless someone is standing in an elevated position, or someone is lying down on their stomach, and then you have a sniper who's on the ground going this way, really, and we see this in people who are going to open the door because someone's knocking on the door and a gunshot comes through. If you're leaning, as I was saying earlier, if you're leaning forward, let's say the first shot here gives her significant pain, I agree with Dr. Reamer on that, and she's leaning over like this, then if I don't want to hit you, I'm sorry. I have a gunshot coming like this, now I look at it, the body lying flat on the table, you can see how it goes straight down. So the explanation that I think is probably most feasible here is that she's leaning forward, most likely probably in pain from the abdominal wound.
And the second shot?
Same thing.
So she's leaning forward, one back here, and where does the second shot come?
The second shot goes right next to the left ear, and on the autopsy photos, you can see a ring of a contusion or a bruise, and it looks very, very similar to her earring that was found there. And again, that's from the energy would push the earring up. The bullet comes down, goes through the breast and out.
So that shot blew her earlobe off, or blew,
Pretty much, yes.
and the ring goes, they find at the scene, right?
Correct.
Okay, so let's walk through the photos, and if you'll stay right where you are, and then I'm going to maybe have you draw something up there. I haven't quite decided yet. Could I have Defendant's Exhibit 169, please? And I remind everyone we should be covered for this. Nope. I'm sorry, 159, not your fault. Right, and again, I apologize for the graphic nature, but this is what you do every day, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so tell us what this depicts.
So this depicts Maggie's body on the autopsy table. And when we're doing our measurements on a body, that's how we're looking at the body, lying on her back or on the person's back on the autopsy table. And we're looking at the left side. Here is that wound with the left ear and the left chin, and here's her left breast. And then right above this wound here, we have that semicircle, which is consistent with the earring.
So this is the shot you would disagree with Dr. Reamer about.
Yes, this is the only shot I disagree with.
And her explanation of this was what? I mean, what was it was going up?
Yeah, she stated that it was going upwards.
It would have entered the breast and then gone up?
Right.
And the reason you disagree with that is?
Well, number one, there's skin tags. When we look closer at the breast and we look closer at the left side of the chin, skin tags are pointing upwards, showing that that's where the bullet came from. And the other is, there's also a part of our job where just sort of common sense, and it just seems very odd that when you have one going this way, you have to be in a very bizarre position to be able to get it to go up. But from the scientific standpoint, it's how the wound looks.
And you believe those wounds are caused by bullets fired in succession?
Oh, I wouldn't be surprised.
Okay. Could we go to, Defendant's Exhibit 160. What does this depict?
So this is the left side of her jaw, and it's pulled forward, but you can see up here, I don't want to, I'll use my finger. You see the skin tag is pointing this way, right? The laceration is coming down here. And if I were to flip this back up, these skin tags point up as well.
Point out a skin tag again.
This is a great example of a skin tag that is like this.
Could you blow that up a little bit for me, please? Right around the, right below the ear. Yeah, right in there, that's perfect. Okay, show me the skin tag.
Okay, well, there's, if we were to, you see here that this is sort of in a triangular shape, and if I flipped it back up, it would fit right into here.
Right,
And so the skin tag is pointing upwards in the directionality of where the bullet comes. It'll be easier to see on the breast, actually.
okay. So could we go to, Doctor, this one?
Yes.
Okay, that would be Defendant's Exhibit 161. Okay, tell me, is that the area you want? Does that help? Or do you-
Yes, but I think before we blow it up, I think what's important is for orientation purposes, you can see that her head is up here. So this would be up, this would be down.
Okay,
And now if we need to blow that up, you can see the skin tags are pointing up. The lacerations, the splitting in the skin, is pointing down. So that indicates an up to down directionality.
okay. And could we see State's Exhibit 498? Tell me what this depicts.
This is a beautiful depiction. I don't mean to use that word, I'm sorry.
Beautiful is not.
I didn't mean that. That's from a forensic pathologist. It's a classic book example of the lacerations coming and pointing downwards. The skin tags are pointing upwards. So skin tag, skin tag, skin tag, all pointing up where the bullet's coming from. The lacerations are pointing down, which is the direction the bullet's going in.
Now, did you and Dr. Reamer agree or disagree on this?
We agreed on this.
Okay. Now, the other thing is, it appears her head was shaved. Why is that?
Right, so any gunshot wound to the head, if you're trying to make a determination of entrance or exit, or trying to get a better idea of what it looks like, you also want to look for if there's any gunshot residue. You shave that area. So most of the time it's to look at the actual outline of it. Sometimes it's to preserve evidence for further testing.
Okay, could I have 168, please? And what is this an X-ray of?
So this is an X-ray of her head and neck, and it might be hard to see, but we have right here in the center, we have a fragment of possibly jacketing but a fragment of a projectile right here in the midline with a few smaller pieces. We have nothing over on the left side where this injury is. So nothing went in here and stayed. All of the projectiles, and then we'll continue down to the chest. It's one rifle that went down, and then you'll see that lead snowstorm, which is consistent with it going back in to the back and down to the chest.
Okay, and could you go to 169, please?
So you can see here how it continues down into the right chest, and it sort of looks like a snowstorm. That's a rifle round.
Okay. Thank you. Go ahead and take the stand, please. So, your job is to look at the photos and determine whether or not the original pathologist was correct or incorrect. That's what we hired you to do, right?
Well, really, what you asked me to do was look at the autopsy report, look at the photos, and give my opinion on the gunshot wounds. That was it. I wasn't even asked to say, I wasn't even asked, is she right or wrong? You just asked me to look at them and give you my opinion.
And how many bullets holes do we have here? How many shots?
Well, we have 5 shots.
And of the 5, you agree with her on 4
Yes, sir.
and disagree with her on 1?
Correct.
Okay. So let's move on for just a moment, and let's look at, we'll go to Paul's autopsy report, and we'll go to his sketch. Let me get this material away. Okay, let me put this, jumble things up. So, let's have you step down again with your pointer, please. It's right here. Your Honor, making an approach. Thank you. So how about detail what she indicates are the wounds to Paul? And we'll start at, I guess, at the bottom and go up,
Sure.
okay?
So there's 2 shotgun wounds to Paul. One is on the chest and one is on the head.
Okay, let's talk about the chest wound first.
Sure. So the chest wound is also an intermediate range, so 1 to 3 feet. Shotgun wound that goes across the chest, does not enter into the chest cavity. It leaves near the armpit, and then the pellets themselves disperse, and some of them go through the arm. I agree with her on that, both on the range of fire and the directionality.
Okay. So the other shot resulted in his head exploding?
Correct.
Okay, explain to the jury what she said and then what you believe, and we'll talk about why the difference is in just a minute. Okay?
Sure. So in her autopsy report, she stated that she believed the entrance was coming from the left side, went up, and then it exited the top of the head. To me, this is a contact range shotgun wound to the top of the head that caused extreme pressure buildup in the head from it being contact, leading to these types of fractures, and that the pellets, so the shotgun wound comes in, the wadding will start to open up. All of that pressure basically, for lack of a better term, will explode what's there because the pressure needs to get out somehow. And then the head would have been down like this, and the pellets lodged here and went into the left shoulder, and then you can see that the pellets are going down into the tissues of the left shoulder.
So you believe the wound that resulted in his head exploding was where? Where would the shotgun have been?
Well, it would have been to the top back of his head.
And how far away from the head?
Oh, no, it would have been pressed against the head.
So it'd be a contact wound to the back of the head,
Correct.
and that would result in, and we're gonna talk about this in a little more detail in a minute, but if it was in the back of the head, tell me how we have a hole here and then a wound here. How does that work?
Well, you're shooting, it's different than shooting into a space where it can expand. It's not up against a firm surface. So shooting into the abdomen is different. The pressure will still go in if it's a contact to the abdomen, but the abdomen can stretch, the pressure and the gas can disperse, because it's sort of an open space with skin that can stretch out and back. The skull really only has one hole at the very bottom. So if I were to take a shotgun and press it against this pile of paper here, and I were to shoot it, this paper would blow up because the pressure has nowhere to go, so it's got to blow everything up that's right there. If I were to take that shotgun and shoot it from here, the pressure is open. It's open to the free atmosphere, right? So it's going to come out of the barrel and it's going to spread out. It'll go a little distance, and that's why we get soot in close range shotgun wounds. It'll go a little distance, but then it'll disperse. So if I were here and I were to shoot down at this paper, the paper is going to get a whole bunch of holes in it, but it's not going to completely explode.
And this is birdshot, correct?
In the head, it's birdshot.
In the chest, it was?
It appears that it was buckshot.
Okay. Now, so her opinion was, and tell me the path.
So unfortunately, the top of the head wasn't shaved, so I can't tell you the exact entrance, but it absolutely is a contact range shotgun wound to the head. And from the way it was described by Dr. Reamer, what she described as the exit wound was that it was near the top of the head and a little bit back on the right. So probably right about here.
Okay. Now, let me talk to you a bit, if you take the witness stand again, please. Defense Exhibit 116. Okay, so, yeah, if you can blow that up a little bit. This is in evidence. Where did this exhibit come from? Is there a book?
Yes, this is from the main textbook on gunshot wounds by Vincent DeMeo.
And it has been described as the Bible for gunshot wounds, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, here we go. And that's, I think we asked Dr. Reamer about this book, and she agreed, right?
Yes, sir.
And this sketch, or these pictures are from that book?
Yes, it is.
Okay. So, this depicts a shotgun shell being fired, correct?
Yes, sir.
And tell the jury, please, this is the initial firing, correct?
The very top image, correct.
And what is that coming out?
What's coming out are actually flames and gas. So sometimes you'll see a little bit of burning because the gunpowder is ignited, so you have a little bit of flame and then gas.
Now, if they had shaved Paul's head, which they did not, correct?
Correct.
Would they have seen some evidence of that gas and flame coming out?
I would say most likely yes. You don't always see it, but yeah, most likely there would be some soot or what we call searing, burning.
Okay, the next one down, B, what is that showing us?
So now what we're seeing is at the front, you can see all the pellets that are still sort of in a cylindrical form because the wadding itself has not completely opened up yet. So you know the pellets are all, you have a plastic tube in essence, and then the pellets are all at the top, and then there's a piece of wadding, so like a plastic disc or something, and then underneath it you have the gunpowder. The gunpowder gets ignited, the heat builds up the pressure, it pushes out the plastic tube through the barrel of the weapon, and that's when, that first image you see that. The second image, you see that we still have all of the shot, or the pellets are still within the plastic tube. And so that's going to go for a little distance. Behind it, we see the cloud of gas. We see the pressure from the cloud of gas. And this is still very early on in the shot.
Okay, and what's the next, C? What does that depict?
Right, so now we're a little bit further out, a little bit later after the weapon's been fired. We still see that the pellets are in sort of a cylindrical form, and you can see that the cloud of gas is getting bigger, right? The reason the cloud of gas is getting bigger here is because it's going to go where? Via the path of least resistance. So it's going out into the atmosphere. This is not pressed against anything. This is just if I were shooting in the air and the gas is coming out.
And the last one, D?
A little further on, you can now see the pellets are just starting to separate. And we see this big cloud of gas. So the pressure is dispersing outwards into the atmosphere.
And if we had another shot, 3 feet down or 4 feet down, what would be happening with those pellets?
So now you're starting to get individual pellets that are, the pellets would be opening up. So they wouldn't still be in that cylinder. If we're talking 3, 4 feet or further. So on the skin, we would start seeing a little outline of individual holes from individual pellets. It's not like they all have separated yet, but we would see some.
10 feet, would they be separated?
Oh, yes,
Okay, and so you'd see a pattern of shot,
correct,
individual pellets.
correct.
Okay. So let's follow this back. If, let's go with her scenario first.
Okay,
And the testimony, I think, has been 3 feet. The muzzle of the shotgun was 3 feet from, and let me maybe put one of these in. Let's see which one of these is what we want. Okay, let me have State's Exhibit 478, please. Now, the wound in the center of his chest, you and she agree on directionality. It came out under his arm. Pellets penetrated his arm and then went on, I think we've heard, out the back window.
right, so directionality and range of fire, I agree with her on that one.
Okay, so when you look at the wound in his shoulder and his neck, and of course, his head, tell us where Dr. Reamer got it wrong.
Well, I think she has it reversed. And the reason being is, now that you've seen where all the pressure would go, if the entrance wound is here on the left shoulder, and we're saying that we're at least 3 to 4 feet away from there because we have no soot, we have no stippling on the skin, then by the time it gets to the left side of the chin or over here at the angle of the mandible, the jaw, we've lost a lot of energy. And so, yes, you can get some pellets still going up into the head, but you're not going to have the top of the head completely blown off. And if you look at the photograph here, you can see, for all of us, it curves over and goes around because the top of our skull's there. If you look here, it goes flat. He's missing the top of his skull. That would not have happened from a 3 to 4 foot, 3 feet or further shotgun wound coming in on the left side.
And the wound on his shoulder, let's look at that real quick. Shoulder, please. That's a pretty big wound, is it not?
It is, and there's pellets that are going down into the tissue.
And what is the evidence of that?
Well, there's photographs that are taken looking down into the wound, and you can see pellets there, and there are x-rays that are taken that you can see there's pellets down into the left shoulder.
Okay, if you go to Defendant's Exhibit 162. Okay, step down here, please.
Yes, sir. Mayor.
Your Honor, may you step down? Thank you. You stand over there with the pointer. Show the jury, please, the individual pellets.
Oh, well, this is probably the easiest one to see. Round and silver. I'm going to have to come around for a moment, I'm sorry. There's one here. There's one here. It's not projecting well, but I know that I saw a few down here, but then on x-ray, it'll become more apparent.
Okay, well, let me do this. Let's go ahead and put the x-ray up while we're talking about this, which would be, which one of these you want to start on?
We can do this one
Okay.
since we're talking about.
Hold on 1 second. Any objection? Your Honor, I would offer into evidence Defense Exhibit 112 and ask it be put under seal.
No objection.
I submit it.
All right. Tell us what exhibit you got. Do you have that? 112? I know this is shocking, Your Honor, we have some technical issues here. This is, I don't know what happened to big poster boards, I just. Got it? No? Yes? No, this is 112. I mean, it's gonna take some time, let's just put it on the Elmo and go from there. We're interested in this area. And I'm gonna have one more. Okay, tell the jury, please, what we're looking at here.
Sure. So any case that comes to a medical examiner's office that has any type of penetrating injury, the medical examiner will do x-rays to see if there's anything left in the body, and then also for safety reasons. But what we're looking at here is, this is the spine, these are the ribs, so we're looking at the chest, the left shoulder, because we're coming out here to the left arm, and all of these dots are the pellets from the shotgun wound. And what we can see here is that these pellets are coming down all the way. So this is the first rib right here. First rib is about right here. So we have pellets all the way down to this level.
Is that consistent or inconsistent with a shot being fired from his left, apparently going upward to the
Right.
brain?
That wouldn't be consistent, and the reason being is then it would have to, the pellets would have to go up, curve, and come down, while the rest of them are continuing this way.
Okay. So could I have this one next?
Sure.
Okay. Defense Exhibit 111. I can do Elmo. I can. You got it, okay, great. Okay, this should be up on the screen now. Can you, we're talking about the lower right hand, I mean, our
The left side of the body.
left side of the
The
body.
R stands for right, so the x-ray is being taken like this, right side, and this is the left side.
Okay, so could you blow up the lower R right corner, please? There you go. Now, what does this depict?
So this is showing here on the left side of the jaw, and we see all of these pellets that are here. So the jaw is right here, and you can see these pellets are in the left side of the jaw, in the neck, and they're going down into the upper left chest.
So, and you believe the directionality on these is down?
Well, from the totality of the evidence, I believe, yes, they're downwards.
Okay. And,
But this x-ray has other findings, I think, that are important for that opinion.
okay,
And, I mean, you can see the severity of the fractures of the skull. The skull should, actually, I think it was better if we were back. The severity, the skull should obviously come all the way around, right? There's no skull here. That's probably the area where the shotgun was pressed against the head. And we've got all of these fractures. In medical terms, we call it multiple comminuted fractures. This is, I mean, textbook for a contact range shotgun wound to the head, to the top of the head, not down here.
and, okay, so, in your opinion, if it had happened the way Dr. Reamer said, you would not have the directionality of those pellets in the shoulder down, correct? And you would not have that kind of devastation to the skull, wouldn't be enough energy.
That's correct. You may have some what we call linear fractures, so little lines of fractures, but you wouldn't have the top of the skull completely gone.
So explain to me, not being a hunter, how does the gas, you got gas coming first, pellets coming second, right?
Yes, sir.
So how do you get the gas going in and the pellets continuing on?
Well, the pellets are projected by the gas causing pressure to push out the shot and then the pellets within it. So, think about a rocket that's going up into space, right? So you see all of the cloud underneath the rocket, and the rocket will continue going up, but the cloud goes out because that's the area of least resistance. But the rocket will still continue. So that's pretty much the same mechanism. The shot cup is going to be pushed out. The energy from all of that gas needs to go somewhere. And when it's being pressed up against a firm surface like a skull, that pressure is going to build up. It's going to go through the hole that's caused by the entrance wound, and it's got nowhere else to go. So it is, and of course this is all happening in milliseconds, but all of that gas is expanding the inside of the skull, and the least resistance is right here at that opening now. So it's going to cause that area to basically pop out.
And some of the pellets would go through, most of the pellets would go through?
Oh, the pellets will continue through. There may be, the brain is not here, right? And so there's probably pellets within the brain, but we don't have an x-ray of the brain.
They didn't x-ray the brain.
Correct.
So, and the skull, I mean, the brain would leave the cavity? Or in this case, did it leave the cavity?
Yes, it did.
And under what kind of force?
I can't give you an exact, number. The forces are usually in what are called newtons, but it's the buildup of that pressure in the skull. It's even in that textbook. Brains being eviscerated in shotgun cases are from contact wounds.
So if you're the person holding the gun to the skull, does any of that energy go up the barrel of the gun?
Well, yes, once that, like I said, it builds up in the head and then it comes back up. So that's what causes the brain to be pushed out. There's going to be pellets that will come out. There'll be other bodily fluids that will come out and will go up along. It'll basically be what we call back spatter or back motion.
But in a violent way?
Yes.
And the person holding that gun, would they be subject to being covered in that material
Yes, they would.
in a very forceful way?
Yes.
Okay, so let me show you a couple other pictures. That's this photo, right?
That's that one.
Yeah, okay. Would you put Defense Exhibit 113, please? It's just X-rays. believe this is an evidence. Okay. Tell us what that depicts.
So now we've moved over to the side, to the left, more of the left shoulder, and showing some of the left arm. And again, you see how the pellets are sort of dispersed and they're coming down. This is your shoulder blade, your scapula. And so it's even down to the level of the collarbone here and the shoulder blade.
Is that consistent with a shot coming up and across the shoulder and into the neck, or is it consistent with something coming down?
Well, again, with the totality of everything, this is absolutely going down.
Okay. Now, let me see. State's Exhibit 487. I'm sorry. Tell us what we learned from this.
Well, for lack of a better term, we have no brain or top of skull. It's completely gone with multiple fractures.
And was his hair shaved?
No, sir, it was not.
Would that have been in the normal practice, the prudent practice, the required practice?
Yes, I would have liked to have seen it shaved to help determine an entrance versus an exit wound.
Okay. But with this autopsy photo, you can't really tell. What would you expect if it was an entrance wound? A contact entrance wound?
Right, well, I can tell with this photograph that it is a contact entrance wound due to the severity of the injury. But what would have been nice is if the hair was shaved, I'd be looking for gunpowder residue, I'd be looking for burning on the skin itself, on the brain itself, and on the skull itself.
So, when this goes, well, back up for just a second. The first shot, I believe you agree to the chest that Dr. Reamer is correct.
I do.
This shot, which would be on the top right back, can you tell, or would you have an opinion as to his posture at the time of that shot?
Well, it's sort of similar to what we were talking about with Maggie, unless somebody is in an elevated position where they're high enough where it can come down like this. He's most likely bent over.
Further than that, about that? I mean,
That's hard for me to say. I
Okay.
mean, his head's over like this because we have the smaller wound, the bigger wound as it's expanding out here, and the directionality goes like that. I can't tell you how far down he was actually bent over.
and why would he be bent over?
Well, the second you get this shot, you're immediately deceased.
No, I'm talking about before the shot.
Right, and we know that he fell forward, he has abrasions to his face, so that indicates to me that the belly shot was first.
When you say the belly shot?
I'm
chest.
sorry, the shot that comes across the chest, not the belly. And that would be extremely painful. So that would cause, he may be bent over from the pain, and then came this shot.
Would that first shot affect his ability to breathe at all?
It would.
In what way?
Well, Dr. Reamer documented what's called pulmonary contusion, so bruising of the lung. And it's hard on a postmortem x-ray to see if you have what's called a pneumothorax, so air that's around the lung. So it'll be difficult for him to breathe.
Could you take that down, Doug, please? Okay, so you believe that he was in pain as he bent over and then somebody shot him in the top of the head?
Well, yes, this is a painful injury.
Okay. Now, let me ask you about just a couple more things.
Should I go back up?
Yes, please. Well, yeah, go back up. Can I have Defendant's Exhibit 189, please? Okay, tell us what this is, please.
So this is, oh, I'm sorry.
Have you seen this before?
Yes, sir, I have.
And is it from the same book as the gunshot, the shotgun?
Yes, it's from the DeMayo gunshot wound book.
And what does it depict? I mean, I'm not telling you specifically what it depicts, but what does it depict?
What the appearance on the body would be at different ranges for shotgun wounds.
Okay. Offer this in evidence, Your Honor.
Your Honor, the state objects, this is hearsay, this is a book by, a page from a book by somebody else, not the witness who's testifying.
Your Honor, she has not objected to two other, her witness and this witness, relating to the same book, different page. It's a learned treatise, and it's in the Bible of gunshot wounds for, I mean, both Dr. Reamer and this witness have testified. It's something they all rely on. I can have them sketch it out, or we can just put this in.
Says the state.
It's hearsay, Your Honor.
That's it. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll have you go to the jury room for a break. Please do not discuss the case. So, doctor, this page 189, what is it?
So this is a photocopy from a page of the gunshot wound book that gives a pictorial diagram of what different range of fires would look like on the skin of a shotgun wound victim.
Anything else from the state or the defense?
Your Honor, under 803 hearsay, the number 18, learned treatises, to the extent called to the attention of an expert witness upon cross-examination or relied by, and directed statements contained in published treatises, periodicals, or pamphlets on the subject of history, medicine, or other science or art, establishes a reliable authority by the testimony admission of the witness or by other expert testimony or by judicial notice, if admitted, may be read into evidence, but may not be received as exhibits. I'm sorry. So I'll withdraw it as an exhibit, and I'll have him do a drawing.
All right. Okay, we'll take 15 minutes.
be seated.
May bring the jury.
Jury is present, sir.
All right, thank you, and may proceed. The last exhibit has been withdrawn.
So, let me have you do something. We attempted a moment ago to use a page out of a book, and I think we're going to have you sketch this out. So, where's the, oh, here we go. How about step down, please, with permission of the court? And how about stand on that side there? And do you remember what that page looked in the book?
Yes.
Okay, so what I want you to do is, if you can't put that in, to replicate that to the jury and tell them what it means.
Sure.
Okay, do you want to take them one at a time?
Yes, I will.
Okay, great, thank you.
So, talking about shotgun wounds to the body and trying to figure out what the range of fire is. A perfect circle, which I'm not a great artist, but let's just say that's a perfect circle. That means that the end of the barrel, right, nice circle, is pressed up against the skin. Now this would be down here on the abdomen where you have leeway, it would end up being a perfect circle. If you have it up where it's going up against something firm, then you would have the circle, but you'd have the splitting from that buildup of pressure. So this is a contact range. If we have some burning around it, contact range or close range. If we have soot around it, we're close range. Now, from the first picture that we looked at, all those pellets coming, and then they start to slowly open up. So now what we've got is sort of looks like a cloud, right? We call it scalloped margins. So now we're moving out a little bit further. We are, in that area of maybe 2 to 3 feet or so. And then as we continue moving further and further, we get the scallop margins, but then we get holes, and it doesn't have to be perfectly around it, but we get holes from the individual pellets that have now moved out. And so if we start seeing individual pellets, we're saying usually the end of the weapon is 4 feet or further. And then to be more specific, is it 4 feet or 5 feet or 6 feet, then you have to test fire.
Okay, so, So as the muzzle gets closer to the wound, there either is no spreading of the pellets, as in a contact wound, but the further away, the pellets begin to expand, and the further away, you get more of an individualized pellet pattern.
That's correct. It's like when it comes out, it comes out and it goes triangular. So it gets bigger, and as it goes triangular, it's almost like playing pool. And you take the cue ball and you hit the pool balls, the billiards, and they start to open up.
Okay, if you put up, is Defense Exhibit 162 in evidence? Okay, well, let me show it. You need to write on this book. While she's doing that, let me push this out of the way. Stirrers are going to be blocked from seeing. Is everything off over there? Please. What? Offer this into evidence, Your Honor. Without objection, and ask it be sealed.
It says the state. Submit it without objection.
Put it up on the screen, please. Okay, now, here we see, and there's measurements here, a rather large wound on his shoulder, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And then a smaller wound in his chin.
Yes, sir.
What does that tell you about the directionality?
Well, it's not just that, it's also that we have no surrounding individual pellet holes. To me, looking at this is not going left to right. I can understand the thought that maybe it was like a tangential graze, but then the pellets wouldn't have gone down and they would have opened up onto the left chin. So again, using the totality of the evidence, these are pellets that are coming down from the top. They're starting to open up. They go through here, and they have to go through another bone, so they're going to open up further and disperse through the left shoulder.
So, and maybe this is too simplistic, do shotgun wounds, do they, and of course, if you just testified, they expand, right? The pattern.
You'll get a different pattern, and for a certain distance, the actual hole will expand, but then you lose that hole and it becomes just individual small holes.
So you've got a smaller hole in his chin and a larger hole in his shoulder. Does that indicate anything? I mean, am I being too simplistic? Smaller means it's expanding at that point?
Right. Not to be offensive, I think it is a little too simplistic because we also have to look at what's around the wound. But yes, with, again, the totality of everything, this is definitely coming downwards from right to left. The only way I could see larger wound on the left shoulder, smaller wound on the left chin is if you consider this a graze wound. But again, using the totality of everything, the size of this wound, the location of the pellets going down into the shoulder, this is not going left to right.
Okay. Now, let me also ask you this. If the wound is in the head, and why isn't the brain macerated? Why isn't the brain shredded by those pellets? Why does the brain exit the skull, as we saw a minute ago, without being shot to pieces?
Because, again, you're having the shot shell,
Take it down. I'm
you know,
sorry.
that's okay. Everything is still within that shot shell as it goes in. The pressure is just going to form around it and push it out. Sometimes you'll see, in my experience, a complete intact brain that may have some holes here and there. Sometimes you'll see a brain that is split in half. and sometimes you will see completely macerated. But from what I saw in the photograph and reading Dr. Reamer's autopsy report, she does state that the brain was received in another bag and that it was, I don't remember the exact words, but that it was severely traumatized.
But no, there's no x-rays of that brain.
There's no x-rays of the brain. I'm sure there are pellets within the brain.
And were there any shots, do you see any actual autopsy photos of the brain? I mean, just the brain?
No, I saw scene photos, but I did not see autopsy photos of just the brain.
Okay. So, you would not well, let me back off for just a second. You have actually done autopsies on contact wounds by a shotgun to the head?
Oh, yes.
And what you're telling us is based on that experience?
Well, experience, training, the textbooks, I mean, articles aren't written about it because it's fairly common knowledge.
Okay. And let me do a little housekeeping. I got a number of photos I want to show you that may be used, were they used by you in you reaching your opinion, okay?
Okay.
Can you come over here so I can not... Your Honor, I intend on showing this witness, Defendant's Exhibit 169, 168, 161, 160, and 159, to determine whether or not he relied on these to come to the conclusions he's come to. I don't think there's any need to publish them to the jury at this point, and I believe the state consents to their admission.
No, objection.
If I might proceed. Would you look at these photos, please?
Yes, sir. Okay.
Are those photographs, autopsy photographs or x-rays, that you relied on in reaching the opinions you've expressed to this jury today?
Yes, sir.
Your Honor, we'd offer these into evidence.
No objection.
They're admitted.
For the record, we're offering Defendant's Exhibit 160, 161, 168, 169, and 159 and 160. I think I already said 160. Give those to you. And again, all under seal, please. So just a couple more questions. 162 is already in evidence, right? Okay. So let me hand that back to you before I... So, the opinions you've given here today, you've given to a degree of medical certainty more probably than not.
Yes.
And you would agree with me that you're not an expert on the vectors of this shot, either one of any of these shots, except you talked about a probability on Maggie on the two shots that go down, right?
Right. I want to make sure I'm answering correctly. So I'm an expert on the directionality within the body that projectiles go, entrance, exit, the direction within the body. As far as, and I think this is what you're asking, as far as crime scene and reconstructing, things of that sort, that's not my area of expertise.
Okay, but you have given an opinion. I want to make sure that we all understand what you've said. You've given an opinion that Dr. Reamer was wrong on the shot that blew Paul's brain out of his skull and it landed on the ground, correct?
That's correct.
And you believe it was a shot in the back right of the skull,
Yes, sir.
and you believe that it was going through his skull, out his neck, and into his arm,
Into the left side, yes, sir.
left side. And we found a number of x-rays showing the pellets. We've seen forensic evidence that you, in the normal course of your work, rely on to draw opinions, right?
That's correct.
And you've done that thousands of times.
Yes, sir.
Now, let me make sure that the jury understands this. When you're submitted materials like we submitted to you in cases, you report, are you paid to give an opinion, a specific opinion?
No, I wouldn't accept a case if someone said this is what we want.
Okay, and you come to conclusions based on the materials given to you?
Absolutely.
And that's your conclusion here today?
The conclusions that I've stated, yes.
Beg the court's indulgence. So you've indicated and testified that would be the blood, brains, pieces of skull, other material would blow out the direction of the hole, and the muzzle of the gun would have been pressed against the skull, correct?
The muzzle of the end of the barrel of the shotgun would be
Right.
pressed against the skin firm enough that there'd be pressure onto the skull, and then you would have blowback as the skull opened up.
And that blowback would follow the barrel of the gun?
Well, it would come back up the barrel of the gun, but it would also distribute.
Right. And what about the barrel of the gun? Would there be biological material jammed into that?
Absolutely.
I'm sorry?
Absolutely.
Okay. So there would be brains, blood, skull, whatever, jammed back up the barrel of the shotgun?
Right. What we say is biologic material.
Okay. Thank you. Please answer any questions Ms. Good has.
Cross-examination.
Thank you, Your Honor. Hi, Dr. Eisenstadt.
Good morning.
Now, when you first started your testimony, you talked a little bit about time of death.
Yes.
Is it the pathologist's job to determine the time of death?
Depends on the jurisdiction, but pathologists are trained in talking about what's consistent or what's not consistent. But I believe, like in Georgia, I believe here in South Carolina, the coroner, in the majority of counties, the coroner goes to the scene and does the investigation. So I don't know how it works here, but there's no doubt that part of a forensic pathologist's training and knowledge is determining cause of death from information given to, time of death from information given to them.
And it's not customary for a pathologist to actually go out to the crime scene, is it?
Oh, I'd say more often than not, the pathologist does not go out.
All right, and now in this case, because this appeared to be homicides, the county coroner would be the one to have requested an autopsy, is that right?
That's my understanding. Definitely in Georgia, it's my understanding here, yes.
And Dr. Reamer performed the autopsy here,
Yes, ma'am.
and she performed an independent autopsy.
She did.
Did you perform an autopsy of either of the victims in this case?
I did not.
And you relied on, I think you testified that Dr. Reamer's report, x-rays, crime scene photos, and autopsy photos in determining your opinion.
That's correct.
And you were hired, right?
Yes, I was.
And you were here on Friday, weren't you?
I was.
So that would mean you've made over $10,000 in evaluating or taking part in this case.
At the end of the day, that's correct.
Did you do a report?
I was not asked to do a report, no.
Wouldn't you agree that a report would have been helpful to explain the scientific methods or investigation that you used to come to your conclusions?
Oh, different jurisdictions do it differently, so I have no idea how it's done here, but, my report would have been exactly the same as my testimony, so I guess it would be on paper instead of, verbally.
Well, you saw Dr. Reamer's report, and that was actually entered into evidence, right?
Yes, I did.
All right, you spoke a little bit about Maggie and
Yes, that's
her
correct.
autopsy. And I believe you said in your testimony that Maggie's shooter could be taller than Maggie, is that right?
Oh, no, that's not what I said.
What did you say?
No, what we were talking about was if Maggie's gunshot or rifle wounds to the top of her head and to the side of her head were with her standing up, that would have to be somebody at an elevated position. So I didn't give an opinion that the shooter had to be taller because we talked about how she could be bent over.
But an elevated position could mean the shooter was taller, right?
Oh, but it could be that the shooter was taller, but that would still have to be somebody at an extremely elevated position shooting down. I'll leave it at that.
And you said that determining trajectory is not something that you do.
At the scene, that's correct. On the body, that's what I do all the time.
All right, let's move on to Paul. Would you agree that when a gun is shot, a lot of energy and momentum is generated, and that momentum and energy tears through a person's body?
Depending on the range of fire, the type of ammunition, yes, I agree with that.
And when pellets are shot, they spread out.
Eventually, yes.
Right. So, if Paul was shot in the back of the head, and those pellets start spreading out, did they come back together when they exited this way?
No, but that's where we're talking about the same thing as range of fire. So those pellets, if you go from the top of the head down to here, this is about 6 inches, so we have about 6 inches, we have maybe a foot, right, from here to here. Those pellets can still be together and starting to spread out. So no, they're not gonna go out and come back together. Some, that's why I was talking about that billiard ball effect. Some, if you hit that cue ball, the side ones are gonna pop out and the middle ones will still be together. So no, they won't go out and come back, but I have no issue with 1 foot from here to here and having still a whole cluster of pellets going through.
But the pellets would be closer together when they first enter the body.
For a certain distance, yes.
And we also talked about soot or stippling. Now, in Dr. Reamer's report, she does note that there was soot and stippling for certain injuries, right?
Yes, ma'am.
And she did not note that for the injury to the shoulder and head.
Agreed.
Okay. And wasn't the top of Paul's skull missing?
Yes, it was.
And Paul's face, it wasn't blown off, was it?
It was not.
His brains weren't splattered all over the floor?
Well, I mean, it depends on what you mean by that, but his brain left his head and ended up being on the floor. There were some smaller pieces in other areas and then a large piece in one area.
I'm going to show you what's been entered as tapes 24 under seal. Okay, I don't know if you can tell from this picture.
I can.
Can you?
Yes, ma'am.
Does that brain look macerated or splattered everywhere?
No, but that brain has been extruded from the head, and there are, when you do a zoom in on it, unfortunately no x-ray, but when you zoom in on it, you can tell that there's injury to the brain, but the brain, yes, I agree, it's not macerated.
And there were pellets on the floor of that feed room.
That's my understanding.
I'm going to show you tapes 26 and 43. You see that is the door to the feed room?
I do.
And tapes 43. Is that blood spatter on top of the door?
That looks like blood spatter at the top of the door, yes.
And no blood spatter out there on the sidewalk from his brain being blown out from his head and his face being left intact, right?
Right, the brain would come out the top of the head.
And it's on the top of that door.
I'm sorry, ma'am?
And the blood spatter is on the top of the door here.
Right, that's blowback. That's from here, the pressure pushing it backwards.
And did you see any crime scene photos of the feed room where there were some containers on a shelf?
I did.
So the containers on the shelf, I believe, would be to the right side on this picture.
Looking at the picture, I believe, yes, inside on the right, there's some shelves with a number of items on it.
And was there kind of a demarcation line showing blood going to the top of the feed room?
Oh, I don't recall. In all honesty, you're starting to get into an area that's not my area of expertise.
Into trajectory, is that right?
Outside of the body, yes.
And did you determine the manner of death for these victims?
I did.
What was that?
For both of them, it was homicide.
Thank you, nothing further.
Anything further? Thank you. You may step down.
Excused, thank you.
Your next witness.
Thank you, Your Honor. Defense calls Tim Palmbach to the stand, please.
Raise your right hand, left hand on the Bible. Do you affirm the testimony about to give the court in this trial shall be the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you. Take a seat in the witness stand. You can adjust the mic if you have to. State your name again for the record. Spell your last name.
Timothy Palmbach, P-A-L-M-B-A-C-H.
Mr. Palmbach, would you tell the jury where you're from and what do you do?
I'm from Connecticut. I've been up in that state for the majority of my life. Most of my career has been in the Connecticut State Police, and I actually started out in a row position. Then I was transferred into a major crime unit, and from there, I spent a good deal of my time in the lab. I retired as a major from the lab in 2004, and at that time, I was head of the whole Division of Scientific Services for the state of Connecticut. I then went back to the school, which was my alma mater, which was University of New Haven, to teach. I took the chair of forensic science position, which is a large forensic science program with both graduate and undergraduate students, and I managed that program as well as teaching. In addition to that, I was doing some degree of consultation, expert consultation, but not much just because of the volume of work that I had. In August of last year, the university offered me an early retirement incentive package, which I gladly accepted. And so now I just teach part-time, assist with a couple of grants that I had, and have a little bit more time to do consulting.
When you were with the Connecticut Forensic Science Division, who did you work under? Who did you train under?
Dr. Henry Seeley.
And who is Dr. Lee?
Within the field, he is one of the original founding fathers and very, very well regarded as holistically as a forensic scientist, but very much so as a crime scene reconstruction expert.
And you mentioned, in addition to teaching and your prior work in the field, you currently do consulting as well?
Yes, I do.
Before we get to that, do you hold any certifications in your field of specialty?
So certifications, I have memberships. It's more of a membership organization than a certification.
Sure. So what's the American Academy of Forensic Science?
Sure. American Academy of Forensic Science is like the American Medical Academy or American Bar Association. It's kind of the large entity that all the professionals belong to. You have to be a practicing practitioner in good faith in order to do that. And then you go, it ranks from an associate member to a member, and eventually, if you meet the criteria, you can be a fellow. So I'm a fellow of the American Academy of Forensic Sciences.
And what is the International Association for Identification?
So the IAI, or International Association of Identification, they tend to have membership and certification in areas like fingerprint examination as well as crime scene analysis.
And you're a member of that
I am.
association? And are you a member of the International Association of Blood Spatter Analysis?
I am, and the name is exactly that. So the membership there are individuals who had the requisite level of training, experience. I believe they even make you or demonstrate you qualified in court before, and then they'll grant you membership in that organization.
What seems self-explanatory to you, but maybe not everyone in the courtroom. What is blood spatter analysis? And it's spatter, not splatter, correct?
That is spatter, correct.
All right.
Well, the basic course would be 40 hours, and I don't think they want to hear the basic course. And I don't mean that flippantly. There's a fair amount to it. The simple way to explain it is we're looking at energy and force applied to sources of blood or other mechanisms and activities applied to blood, and then determining the patterns that result from that. And once we understand that, that's much of what the training is in a lab, an environment. You create these patterns, you study the patterns so you understand them. Then it's going to a scene, seeing these patterns, properly interpreting them, and drawing conclusions from them. So that's the short version of what it is.
And I believe you're also a member of the Massachusetts Forensic Science Oversight Board, is that correct?
Yes, I am.
What is that?
That's a governor's board that they bring in experts from around the country of different specialties, and we look at practices and protocols within the forensic science community within the state of forensic science. So it's essentially an advisory board.
I believe you also have a law degree?
I do, sir.
Why would you do that?
That's a good question. I haven't practiced law. It was back in get the time right, early 90s. There was a lot of stuff going on related to new technologies, DNA being the biggest of all of them. And what was happening for lab directors, and I was an assistant lab director at that time, is we spent more time in the court or writing papers in support of new testing and not knowing anything about it. So many of us, myself included, said, if this is going to be a big part of our job, we have to go back and learn it. So that's what motivated me to go back and do it.
And then currently, professionally, are you the executive director of the Henry C. Lee Institute of Forensic Science at UNH?
I was, but I gladly, when I went to emeritus status, gave that position up and got a little bit of time back. But I had been for 19 years prior to that.
And have you, as part of your consulting work, have you been qualified as an expert in state and federal courts in various states?
I have.
Do you know what states?
Oof. All right. Connecticut, New York, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, California, Illinois, Alabama, yeah, I think so. North Carolina for sure. I think I got it.
And what are your areas of expertise that, for which you've been qualified and that you wish to be qualified in this court?
In the big genre, it's crime scene reconstruction and analysis, and sub-disciplines underneath that independently are bloodstain pattern interpretation and shooting incident reconstruction.
One of the cases, I believe, would State v. Michael Peterson. Were you an expert in that case?
I was, sir.
And was that the stair-step case?
I think it's known as the staircase case, yeah.
All right. Have you ever not been qualified as an expert in crime scene reconstruction, bloodstain analysis, and shooting incident reconstruction in any court, state or federal?
No.
Your Honor, at this time, I would offer Mr. Palmbach as an expert witness in the area of crime scene reconstruction, bloodstain analysis, and shooting incident reconstruction.
Says the state.
Is it blood stain analysis or blood spatter analysis or splatter analysis?
The field is referred to as blood stain analysis. Blood spatter would be a subcomponent of the greater field, yeah.
No objection.
He's admitted without objection.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Palmbach, were you hired by Mr. Harpootlian and I on behalf of the defendant, Alec Murdaugh, in this case?
I was.
And what were you hired to do?
To review the case, look at the forensics evidence, the pattern evidence, crime scene documentation, lab analysis, autopsies, and related investigative reports that dealt with the scene activity and the physical evidence.
And what are you charging for your time?
I am.
How much do you charge?
I do it as a block rating, just simply because I don't want to keep track of hours. So my initial retainer fee was $5,000. I will have another finalizing fee as I complete here. Last night I scratched it out. I believe it's going to be $8,000 more plus travel expenses.
And did you come down here Friday and did not get to testify and spent the weekend in the Low Country?
Yeah, I showed up Thursday, actually, but yeah, I've been here for a bit.
All right. What have you reviewed in this case? What materials have you been provided?
Again, lots of photographs, crime scene photographs, evidence photographs, autopsy photographs, autopsy records data, x-rays, various lab reports, investigative reports, diagrams created by investigating personnel, and reports that were related to those diagrams.
Now, when you've, upon your initial review of the autopsy reports, did you make any suggestions to us?
Yeah, once I agreed to take the case, that material was submitted, and I began to just review it, and that's what I usually do, is read through it and see, get a sense of what makes sense. One of the areas that I was very concerned with right away was looking at the shotgun wound to Paul. And based on all my training and experience, what we visualized in the head is absolutely consistent with a contact wound. Reading through the report, it didn't say that. It was written obviously as an exit wound with the contact being down in the left shoulder and the left face. I think within a day, I called back to Attorney Harpool and yourself and said, this doesn't look right to me. It's inconsistent with my interpretation of the results. And my best advice for you would hire a forensic pathologist to review the case.
And were you sitting here in the courtroom when Dr. Eisenstadt testified?
I was?
And before coming to town to Walterboro Thursday, Friday, had you ever met Dr. Eisenstadt before?
No,
Had you ever worked with Dr. Eisenstadt before?
no,
Did you talk to Dr. Eisenstadt at any point in time before you arrived here in South Carolina for this case?
no.
Okay. Did you have an opportunity to go to Moselle?
I did,
And when was that?
Friday morning,
Okay. Was that your first physical trip to Moselle?
correct.
Okay. And we'll get to some of the things that you located. Generally, overall, I want to first address the shooting of Paul. As you reviewed everything and tried to reconstruct the crime scene, can you give the jury an overall picture of Paul's murder? How did it occur?
Sure. I believe it began with Paul, his right shoulder to the open feed door. This is inside the feed room, and he's facing straight ahead. And he's upright, and his arms are more or less at his side. And the first shot comes in a very oblique angled shot into his chest, travels through his chest, exits the side of his chest into his left arm, exits his left arm, and then continues on and exits through a window pane in the feed shed, which is the opposite side from the doorway.
Roughly, where would the shooter have been on the first shot into Paul?
Where would the shooter have been?
Yes, sir.
Okay, they're definitely going to be outside the door, and how close they are to the door is subject to a lot of different factors. So first of all, what's reported is a small amount of gunshot residue in that area, not a lot of it. And in fact, as I looked at it, yeah, I could see some of the particulate matter adjacent to the medial side of the injury, but I couldn't see much more gunshot residue beyond that. Now, in fairness, when you have an article of clothing and you're shooting through the article of clothing, the majority of the gunshot, if not all of it, depending upon the distance, will stay on the outside of the clothing. In this case, it was black clothing, blood-filled clothing, and you wouldn't be able to see that unless you did some enhancements or use something we call like a modified Grice reagent test.
Well, let me stop you there. Did you see any indication that SLED did any GSR testing of the clothing?
I did not.
Okay. All right. Please continue.
A GSR pattern testing of the clothing.
Correct. I'm sorry.
Okay. However, I'm not going to dispute what I read, that there was a minor bit of stippling there. But a minor bit of stippling there with a shotgun is going to give you a necessary minimum distance of 2 to 3 feet from the wound to the end of the barrel. The other factor you have to take into consideration is both of the shot shells that have been associated with the shooting of Paul were found within the feed room. Now, while the shotgun's never been recovered, and we really don't know the action and how it worked, it is a reasonable assumption that it's a semi-automatic variety, and that therefore, as an individual pulls a trigger, it'll eject to the right out of the port. So in order for the two casings to be within the feed room, the probability is that at least the receiver part, the ejection area, has got to just be inside the doorway minimally in order for the casings to stay inside of there.
All right. I'm going to stop you right there. You said it was a semi-automatic firearm. Why do you say that?
Well, we don't know. I mean, we clearly don't know because we don't have the weapon. Options could be a single shot. That doesn't make much sense. You'd have to shoot and stop and reload and shoot again. It could alternatively be a double barrel, but in my review of the firearms report from the state lab, they indicated that their examination of those two shot cartridge cases were that they came from the same weapon, that they were co-aligning them to one weapon. In the case of a double barrel, you have separate breech face areas, you have separate firing pins, and you're not going to get the two casings to look exactly alike. So that more or less took the probability of a double barrel shotgun away. And I think the logical inference is it's a semi-automatic. It could also be a pump-based action, but again, that's an additional stipulation.
Sure. The, is there any indication that Paul had an opportunity to defend himself? Were there any defensive indications?
So I frankly think he was startled by that shot. His right shoulder was at the door. I mean, if he knew somebody was coming and/or saw somebody coming, he would be facing the door or turning, trying to run, which he wouldn't have anywhere to go. But he was essentially facing this way, and the door is this way. I don't think he even perceived it until he was shot the first time. And you asked the question, did I see any defensive injuries or any indication of defensive actions on him or in the feed room? The answer is no.
What type of defensive indications have you seen in the past that would indicate that there was a struggle of some sort?
Well, I think obviously your hands always kind of come up, and his hands would be going up in the direction of the shooter and the weapon. So the orientation of his body would have changed. His hands coming up means that he likely, they could have been injured. Certainly there could be gunshot residue distribution on them. There could be,
Sure.
That'd be the main difference.
Okay. And the, and what was the ammunition in the first shot into Paul?
That was buckshot. So it's 9, about 38 caliber pellets.
And I think you mentioned that the spent shell was found inside the feed room, is that right?
Correct.
All right, let's move on to the second shot of Paul. Can you reconstruct that generally, and then we'll get to some photographs?
Sure. Based on the general morphology of what happened to the head, this explosive nature, it's taught that way. We've learned it that way, and through personal experience, you never see that except when you have a high energy source contact wound. The reason I say a high energy source contact wound, if you took a little 22 caliber revolver and held it to the head, you will not see what we saw here. Simple reason being is it's not creating anywhere near the volume of what we're talking about, these gases, this high voluminous gases that you get with a shotgun or a rifle. Effectively, why? Well, the barrel of the shotgun is going to be longer, it's wider, and so that you have this whole big area within the barrel that's being pressurized. And that just creates an exponentially a whole lot more gaseous material than you would have seen in a handgun. So seeing that head in the condition it was, that is a contact wound from a high energy source weapon, which would understandably be a shotgun or a high powered rifle.
Now, I don't want to repeat what the jury just heard, but were you sitting here in the courtroom when Dr. Eisenstadt, explained the
Sure.
mechanism of the head to the shot?
I heard that, yep.
Shot to the head, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And is that, do you agree or disagree
Yeah,
with
no,
his assessment?
completely agree.
Now, we'll get to this shortly, but there's, on the door, as it swung open, at the top, there's hair, it looks like Paul's, and there's blood at the top. Is that inconsistent with your assessment of how the shot happened?
No, actually, it's completely consistent with that.
Well, explain that, please.
So what happens is the barrel is in alignment and tightly against the head. And again, the shot goes into the head. The gaseous material begins to build. And again, this is, milliseconds is right, very, very quickly. It's beginning to swell and build. At the same time, the wadding is starting to move down toward the exit area and come out. And then the head finally goes from the pressure. It can't go. And as it goes, the pressurized gases are going to find the quickest area to escape, and then they're going to redirect in that format. That ends up being the entrance hole. So you kind of get like a shift in action here, and all of the energy now is kind of recategorized, and it's now pushing up toward the corner of the ceiling and the door.
Now, have you seen Dr. Kinsey's photograph of the door, and it's a crime scene photo, and there's a little ding in the door?
I have seen that,
Did
yeah.
you go out and inspect that on Friday?
I did, because you could clearly see a little ding, and I totally agree that could have been a pellet impact, but it was taken, at that time, it was taken at a little bit of an angle. And I felt it would be better if I get up and get 90-degree and closer view and examine it myself, and I did.
And while you were there, did you also see any other pellets in the feed room that you attribute to the
Yeah.
shooting of Paul in the head?
So first of all, in close examination of the impact on the door, I do believe that's from a pellet, and actually the dimensional size of it is consistent with the diameter of a number 2 steel shot pellet. And it is also, it was elongated, so you could see that it was coming from the bottom up. Quite near there, probably only a foot away, on the header, the trim header of the door, there was another one of these steel pellets, again, the right diameter, actually embedded in the wood. It's still there today. Going back, and I'll be honest, I did not see that in the photograph. Going back and looking at the photographs, I confirmed, yeah, it actually was present the day of the shooting.
So, Mr. Palmbach, how is it that a shot going down into the head could lead to pellets causing indentations in the door and getting stuck in the header of the door?
An explosion really is the best way to do it, but it's not just this kind of an explosion. It is like the military would call it a chafe charge, where you focus the explosion in a narrow pathway, and that creates a much larger damage area. And that's what happened here. You expanded the skull plate, and it pushed back through, first of all, pushed back through the actual entrance hole in the skull. And as that happened, then the skull breaks and pulls out, but there's now a very large energy moving this way, and it's drawing with it things as heavy and large as the entire brain, but it's also grabbing blood, it's grabbing tissue, it's grabbing skin, it's grabbing hair, it's grabbing the bone fragments, and it's grabbing part of the steel shot that's still in the skull cavity, and it's pushing it at a pretty reasonable velocity up and toward that corner of the door and the ceiling.
There's and we'll get to photos, but there appears to be the wadding that in the middle of the feed room on the floor. In your opinion, where did that come from?
It came out from inside the brain. That obviously made it through the brain, it was in the brain. And again, remember, the wad has these little fingers that tend to open and flare out like that. As a matter of fact, if you look at it in the photograph, you can see that it was flanged. The fingers were folded back. So it kind of is breaking power, right? It's not going to go through the rest of the brain and out the side of the face and into the shoulder as easily as a pellets will. So it stopped more or less in the brain, and then it got caught up in this explosive force. I'm assuming it just went up it could have gone up into the shooter, it could have gone up into the door, could have gone up the ceiling, and wherever any one of those areas could have happened and fallen down on the floor where we find it.
And I want to talk about the shooter. How close would the shooter have been in relation to the shot into Paul's head?
Well, so this is contact. So he's got to be close enough to get the barrel in contact, firm contact with his head. We don't know what that gun is. I don't know is it an 18-inch barrel length, a 26-inch barrel length? We don't know that. Obviously, that's going to change the difference. But and the shot is somewhat overhead downward. So all of that is bringing this shooter much closer to Paul than when he took the first shot with Paul standing upright.
So we see indentations from a pellet in the door. We see a pellet stuck in the threshold of the door. What's happening to the shooter in this, in your reconstruction of a contact shot to the back of the head, what's happening to the shooter at that point?
He's getting hit with large amounts of brain material, blood, skin, hair, bone fragments, and I believe very likely some of the pellets.
And what would be the force of that hitting the shooter?
Substantial, and the reason we know that is, one, we've seen what's happened to the skull, how badly damaged it was, and secondarily, we have two of the pellets. One is actually denting this metal door, and another one is embedding in the wood above it. That, I can't quantify that force, but that's substantial force. And that's the kind of energy that's taking all of the brain, all the fluid, all the tissue, and all the hair, and all the broken skull places, and sending it. Principally, it's going to follow right along the barrel pathway, around it for sure, but it's going to go in the same direction essentially that the barrel had been placed.
Would you expect to see any type injuries to the shooter?
That's quite possible. I mean, for sure, they're literally covered in all of that material, for sure. But given the size of the bones, the amount of the bone, and now pellets coming back at them, if any of them hit him, it's going to be an injury, whether it's substantial or just a stinging injury. Yeah, I think that that's possible, actually probable.
And how much biological material and blood is going to be on the shooter's clothing and on the shooter's person?
A lot on the upper body and head.
I mean, if the shooter has thick hair, something a lot different than what I have, would you expect it to be matted in the shooter's hair?
Certainly. I mean, you're gonna be covered on any surface, but yeah, I guess the thicker the hair is, the probably more will retain in there.
And we have pictures of the room showing blood in various places throughout the room, right? And is that consistent with?
Exactly. So you have this core high velocity, kind of high volume pattern going up to the corner. But you also, this hole in the side of the head it's like this, it's very large. And so once that's open, there's still a lot of energy right there, and there's blood and tissue right there. You're also then going to just literally blow volumes of that, and that's what we're seeing throughout the room. That's why you're seeing it, on shelves and on the door trims and on this wall and on this wall over here. With the exception, if you really look at it, there are some areas they have a void appearance, which to us would indicate there was something there that absorbed the blood that should have been there. And in this case, it would be the shooter's position.
And again, we're going to get to some photos and walk through that a little bit more, but I want you to now address just sort of an overview. Dr. Kinsey's, I guess, reconstruction based on Dr. Reamer's autopsy, where the shot is being made from a different angle. Do you think that's possible in this case?
Oh, I don't think at all it's possible that the shot came the way that Dr. Reamer articulated. I think probably Dr. Kinsey, and I don't blame him, relied on that information that was provided to him by Dr. Reamer, and he began to conduct his analysis based on that information, which was wrong.
But as to the angle of the gun, do the angles work out where you could take this shot from the outside?
So you have to look at the shot distribution evidence. We'll talk about gunpowder residence. We'll look at where blood spatter is located, and then we'll look at where we see, this pellet and other projected spatter coming back. None of that is consistent with the lower trajectory upward shot that Dr. Kinsey articulated, and all of it is consistent with an overhand contact shot to the back of Paul's head.
Okay, well, let's start walking through these photos. And we'll start with Defendant's Exhibit 162, which is an evidence, and please cover your screens. This is under seal, and it's, can you pull it up, Doug? Okay. Do you recognize this photo?
I do.
And what is it?
This is showing the left side of Paul's face and the left shoulder and the injury in that area.
Now, can you explain the significance of the size of the two different wounds, one in the side of the jaw and one in the shoulder?
Yes, the shoulder is much larger and much more diffuse and spread out. The side of the neck is a bit more circular and certainly smaller. And then if you look at the shoulder injury, again, it's substantively larger, and you can see, damage, a lot of tissue damage in that area. And you can even, from this photograph, visualize easily one of the pellets that's still present, more or less up on top of that area.
Sure. Now, as as a shotgun, pellets even enter the body, do they continue to spread out? Or exit the body and spread out?
Yes,
Okay.
yes. Again, it's all about distance, you know, in order, your spread, the distribution of spread is a factor of distance travel.
And we're not going to pull up the other autopsy photo, but do we in fact see that under Paul's arm? This individual pellets as it exits under his armpit?
Sure, and then you actually can see the effect of spread over distance, because by the time those pellets hit the window behind there, which is, you know, 5, 6, 7 feet, now you start to see the spread of the shot.
Okay. Show you 191, Stephen. Go ahead and get these in. What's that? I think they're in, but we just want. Okay. I'm going to show you, Mr. Palmbach finished Exhibit 190, 191, and ask if you relied upon these in your analysis.
I did.
Your Honor, we move Exhibits 190, 191 in evidence under seal at this time, I believe without objection.
No objection.
They're admitted.
Doug, if you could pull up 190, please. Now, will you tell us, Mr. Palmbach, what this photo depicts and how it relates to your analysis?
Well, this is showing the final resting position of Paul, and this is obviously after both of the shots and where he's located. Yeah, obviously you can see the brain is located on to the left of him against his left leg, and there's a substantial amount of spatter in this area. Around and transfer and pooling by his feet in the doorway. And you see that his feet are more or less on the, if you were standing on the outside, it would be more or less on the right side of the doorway, and then the rest of his body angles a little bit more toward the left from that, once he's outside.
Does this photo inform your opinion as to where Paul was probably standing or kneeling at the time he received the fatal blow to his head?
Well, this photo in conjunction with several other photos in that area, but yes, it does inform to me his motion between the two shots.
And let's go to 190, excuse me, 191, also under seal. And again, is this same, just from a different angle?
It's from the other side, yeah, and so you're now looking more at the left side. And again, you can see the large brain mass, you know, somewhat near his left knee area, but you can also see a fairly large piece by his, of brain material by his left ankle. And then there's more, maybe 18 inches away from his body, kind of adjacent with his belt or hip area. There's also what appears to be a large fragment of skull on the ground, maybe a foot off of the cement pad.
All right. I'm going to show you three more photos. I'm show you one, finish exhibit 192, 192 and 165, and ask if you relied upon those in reaching your conclusions.
I did.
And what are they?
They're views principally of the floor area within the feed room.
All right, thank you. Your Honor, we move defendants 165 and 192 into evidence at this time without objection, I believe.
No objection.
They're admitted.
And Doug, if you'll pull up 165, please. And what do we see here, Mr. Palmbach?
Again, it's looking downward at the feed room, so you can see this from the area of the stoop, and then heading back into the kind of the feed bag, and you'll see that yellow placard number 1. And what I can deduce from that, let's focus with the placard area number 1 and the blood stain that's on the floor in that area. That is classified as we call a vertical drip pattern, and that occurs when blood from above comes down. I believe that what that blood is attributed to is the chest wound, and so, you know, the shot came into the chest. Of course, the chest entrance is going to start bleeding, but as long as Paul is upright, you really just, gravity's going to kind of just flow that down, you know, his shirt, and that'll kind of catch it. It's not, we won't see that on the floor for a period. But the shot then came out of his chest, into his arm, and out of his arm. So you've got, 17 or 18 different holes here. There's lots of opportunity for this to bleed, and in fact it did, and you can see the blood running down his arm. And so I think what you're seeing in those accumulations of droplets on the ground is the positioning now post that first shot of his left arm bleeding. And then you can begin to see some movement away from that toward the door.
All right, Doug, go back to, yeah, thank you. So did we see the wadding there by the number 1?
Correct.
And is that the wadding from the headshot?
Yes, it is.
And, all right, back up, Doug, and go to the threshold, the entry of the, can you enlarge that? Yes, thank you. Can you tell us what this is?
So there's a couple things going here. One, it might be, can I come down a point?
Yes, please, please.
It might just be easier.
Doug,
Your Honor, is that okay? Thank you.
Go regular size, and then don't make that so tight, but cut it in half. There you go. Thank you. You probably want to stand over here,
Other side,
Tim, so you don't block your steering.
Okay. First of all, again, these areas here are the vertical drip patterns that I was alluding to. And again, you can see them beginning to move in this direction. And you'll even see a couple of the larger droplets here, again, moving toward the door. Again, these are coming from Paul as he's moving away more or less kind of from the center part of the room toward the doorway. But an area I think that's really worth paying attention is this area of the floor here, and then this little bit of trim here. And this is a second impact area. This is not directly related to what we're seeing up on the ceiling, although it is related to the overall event of him receiving that headshot. And I believe what we're seeing here is after I think he's moved sufficiently that he's now moving toward that doorway, and the door jamb right here. And in this area here is where he's going to receive this shot. And as he receives this shot here, it's going to exit from his lower face and it's going to hit the shoulder. As it's coming out of the lower face, it's coming with a volume of blood and tissue. And then that's going to get slammed basically right into the shoulder where the shots are. And that's going to create another projection, independent. And that's going to line up for us that his head is located right in, about a foot or so off the ground, and pretty close proximity to the edge of this trim board. And you can see the resulting spatter in this area, which all supports that impact site and is consistent with that being the projection of the shot out of his head through his lower side of his face and into the shoulder.
So are you saying that the blood spatter on the floor there that you just pointed out is from the exit wound from the chin and back into the shoulder?
Correct.
Now, Doug, if you don't mind pulling up Defense 192, please. Just another similar photo. Are you sure that's 192? Yeah, there we go. Does that depict the same?
It's the same basic area. I mean, we can highlight here, again, there are larger pieces of brain-like matter or tissue, bone fragments here, here, and here, and there's even more that are beyond placard number 1.
Now, Dr. Kinsey, and relying upon Dr. Reamer, where does he have Paul being shot? On this side or on the other side, or do you know?
Well, with his claim of it coming from the left shoulder and the left side of the face, he'll always have to be, the weapon will always have to be lower than that area and to the left side of the victim, of Paul.
Well, from the spatter on the floor here, where's, in your opinion, where's Paul physically located at the time of the shot?
He's right here. He is right up against that doorway.
And where's the shooter?
The shooter cannot be there because Paul is there. The shooter's going to be in the same doorway area, probably even, maybe 1 foot there and 1 foot in, but adjacent to the open door, the opposite side of the door.
Do you see what's referred to as a voiding area on that door?
Yes.
All right, let's look at State's Exhibit 26, which is already in evidence.
Well, and
Please pull it. Okay.
and if you,
Hold on. Don't move on yet, Doug. Well,
I say we could actually see on the floor there.
okay, Doug, go back to 192, I believe is what we're looking at.
So if you look at the area immediately.
Let's stop right there.
sorry.
What's a voiding area?
So a voiding area is an area where we would expect, looking at all the other areas around it, to see blood stain. So in other words, in this case, you really have blood projecting everywhere, just because of the voluminous explosion of the head. And so if we look at an area that seems like it has less blood than the immediate adjacent areas, then the best explanation for that is something was there to block it and capture it. That is to say, that blood didn't make it to the floor and didn't make it to the door because it's physically on the body of the shooter, and that's now gone. It's left the scene.
So point out the voiding area that you see.
Again, with the shooter standing in this area here, which is the door side of the door jamb, right? There is much less blood. Now, again, there is some here, but if I'm standing here and blood is being projected all the way up and showering all the way down, in addition to this big stream of it's coming this way, then of course droplets can still kind of make their way up and come down and come here and around, just not as many. My presence here is going to absorb a lot of those droplets, but not all of those droplets. And so we see much less of that blood here. And if you look at the face of the door, the lower half of the door, there's much less than there is above it. Again, will you see some droplets on it? Yes, but actually most of those droplets, when you really look at them, have a downward trajectory, which is, again, very consistent with them coming up and over and downward. So it's by volume, there's less blood there than we're seeing in the immediate adjacent areas, and the scientifically defensible explanation for that, the reasonable explanation for that, is that we have a voiding effect taking place.
Let's go to State's Exhibit 26, Doug, please. Next one. If you could sort of blow up the door, please.
Yeah, you almost don't have to. You can.
Okay. Well, it doesn't really help when you do that.
Yeah, if you go back to the original, I think it helps. So, literally across the whole top of the door, but most particularly in the upper left corner, right by the hinge side, the upper top, you see large amounts of blood transfer. You see what looks like a contact transfer of material. And as we blow up on that area, we'll see bits of what looked like brain debris. We'll see lots and lots of hair in that area. This is also the area where we saw that pellet impact. So this is following the barrel back up for the shooter. This is the area right in alignment with this that you're seeing up here on the upper part of the door. And that's where there is a very substantial amount.
Is that, Does that indicate it went above the shooter?
Well, as I was going to say, if that volume is there and that much is coming back, then logically, why are we seeing such diminished below that? Why is that, yes, there's blood there, but the volume difference between that is substantial. And that can be explained by, again, the fact that that is a shooter location and much of the blood, not all of it, but much of it is being transferred onto their clothing.
And
Or face, or hands, or them, or the gun.
how off the ground does Paul have to be for that much blood to go up that high?
Well, I think the best, we have some pretty good data as to where Paul's head was because of that secondary impact location that I showed you. The exit portion of his head has got to be in that general vicinity. Obviously, the 8 or 10 inches up is where the entrance part of it is. But that does give us a pretty good approximation of where Paul's head was when that shot occurred.
So 2 feet off the ground, 3 feet?
Not even.
Not even, okay. Is there enough force to send his hair to the top of the door? With the,
Well, clearly there was, because we see it. I mean, yes.
okay, all right. I have a few more door photos. Finish 193 and, oh, do you have any objections? I'm going to show you, while you're down here, Defendant's 193, and is that a photo that you rely upon
It is,
in your
yes.
analysis?
It is.
And, Your Honor, we've moved Defendant's 193 into evidence without objection and under seal at this time.
No objection.
Submitted.
Thank you. Doug, can you pull up 193? And you just hold it right there. Can you tell us what that is?
So now that we're looking at a little closer view of just the top of the door, again, you can see the extent of the blood spatter in this area of the door, and then also the adjacent area of the door trim. Of note isn't also that it's there, and there's lots of it, but lots of it is quite small. And in the blood stain analysis field, what makes blood droplets smaller is by increased energy. So as we start seeing an accumulation of droplets, which we do on the trim up here and also on this door here, that means that they are subjected to much more energy and than virtually the other droplets we're seeing around the room. And that's because these are the ones that are coming directly back under the explosive power coming out of the entrance hole and moving up, much of it into the shooter, some of it up and over and into the ceiling and the top of the door.
Doug, can you blow up well, hang on. Do you see the pellet in the threshold of the door on this?
Yes, it's going to be in this area right here.
Can you find it and blow it up, Doug? I think you missed another.
Well, yeah, he got the other pellet, yeah, he got the actual pellet, and that is the actual pellet. And then I was pointing, which is here, I believe, it's right here, yep. And that's the actual physical pellet that was observed in the door.
So this photo is from the crime scene?
Correct.
Right, and when you went out Friday, did you see that exact pellet?
I did.
And tell the jury again, in your opinion, how that pellet got there?
It has been projected back along the axis again of the barrel of the gun because of this high voluminous material that's now escaped and is pushing back out the entrance hole. And it's moving all this material with a lot of energy, a lot of velocity back up in this corner.
Now, Mr. Palmbach, if the shooter was on the outside and angling toward Paul's shoulder and up through his head and out the top of his ceiling, would you expect pellet and the markings on the door to be in that area?
Well, for starters, I wouldn't expect the patterns. In the scenario where the top of the head is going to be the terminal point of the gunshot, in other words, of the theory that it started in the left shoulder, went to the left cheek, went into the head, I do not believe that you'd even have a fracture of the skull. You wouldn't even have an exit wound. That those pellets because of two reasons. Mostly, it's not contact, all that gaseous material is not going up into the cranial vault, it's just going freeform, so you don't get any of the explosive value. And secondarily, the number 2 pellets are much lighter, their mass is less, and so they're not going to have the energy that's necessary, particularly after moving through a shoulder, through a face, and up through the brain, to penetrate and break out of the skull. I think you wouldn't even see any of them outside of the skull. You certainly would not see that rearward projection or blast of blood and hair and bone and pellets that we did see.
I'm going to show you Exhibit 181, 183, 188, and 186. And can you identify these are those photos you took on Friday?
They are.
Yeah, you can. We would move 181, 183, 186, and 188 into evidence at this time without objection.
No objection.
You're admitted.
Just work quickly through these. Exhibit 181. Well, let's don't do this. Let's go to 188, Doug, and tell me what 188 is.
So this is an overall photo of that same area of the door that I took on Friday, and you can see the impact dent right here in that upper corner. Same relative position as you saw it in the crime scene photos.
Can you also see the pellet lodged in the,
Yes, yep, and the actual pellet is up here on the door trim, and again, it's in the same relative position as observed in the crime scene photos.
okay. And then, guess let's look at 181 and just briefly point out 181, Doug? Thank you.
So this is a close-up view, 90-degree on, of that pellet up in the into the door trim, and what it's demonstrating is a couple things. One, that it is a steel pellet. You can see the coloration. You can also see that the diameter fits the general profile diameter of a number 2 pellet. A number 2 pellet is 0.15 inches or 3.8 millimeters. And so if you, unfortunately, this particular protractor and ruler had it backwards, so you have to kind of protract down, but that is very consistent with that 3.8 millimeter. So
Okay.
this is just to demonstrate that it's actually embedded into the wood, and it's the right kind of structure and size of what the number 2 pellet would be.
And 186, please, Doug. 186.
Yep.
Just tell us what that is, Mr. Palmbach.
So that's a close-up. That's actually a close-up of that impression on the metal door that we saw. And you can see that it's kind of oblong in shape, and it's more round and fatter here toward the bottom. And again, and the resist ruler, by the way, is running parallel to the floor, and the floor is below it. And then it tapers off angularly this way, which shows the direction of that pallet is actually coming in an upward direction. It's not coming straight on.
Lastly, I'm going to show you on this set, defendant's 182. Can you identify that?
Yes, I can.
What is it?
It's a picture of me on the external part of the doorway, just showing what the relative position would have to be to hold the shotgun in roughly the positioning that Dr. Kinsey was alluding to.
All right, and Your Honor, we would move to introduce defendant's exhibit 182 into evidence, plead without objection.
No objection.
Can you pull up 182, please?
So, as you can see, I'm crouched very tightly against the right doorway. It's about as far over as I could go, and still, I was trying to, how far can I go over and still manage, a firearm in this kind of relative position here? Right out of the gate, what you realize is my body is physically in the position where Paul is passing through. And we previously identified this area right here, like right in my right shin area, about a foot off the floor, and here, where I'm seeing the impact spatter associated with the exit out of the lower face and into his shoulder. So Paul is moving through here, and his head's at about this location, very close to his door, and then outside of the door where we finally found him. And it's in that location that, from the other side, the shotgun comes down into his head. The other thing that I wanted to show in this photograph, and it should be noted that you see a shelf here on the right, that's a change from the original scene. Not that shelf is the same, the best I can determine, but they cut out the rest of it. So, it actually went down the whole length of that wall. There was a refrigerator on it and other objects. And if you look at the distance between the edge of that shelf, it's 4 inches or so. It's not possible that the shooter could have gotten in the room, and there's just not enough room for them to be on the left side of Paul. So they would have to be outside reaching in with the shotgun in order for that to happen, but in my attempt to do that, I was in the wrong location. And I think a couple critical things about that is, again, we do not know the length of the gun because we don't have it, so I don't know how long it is, but we can make a general assumption this would be pretty short. It would be probably longer than that, but because there was no observed, and nobody talked about seeing any gunshot residue, even on the shoulder of Paul, then you've got to have, again, a minimum, and that area was fairly well exposed at 2 to 3 feet minimum where the barrel would have to be. So if the barrel was placed inside on the floor in an upward, again, so it's got to come across the shoulder, upward and out the back, it's this kind of a trajectory, you can't even have the shoulder until about 2 feet from there, and then the side of the head here, and Paul's head here. None of that creates a pattern consistent with anything that we see. Now, that would account for a lack of gunshot residue if that was true, but what it definitely would have changed is the pellets coming out of here now would have definitely begun to spread, and you would have seen pellets all across the side of his left side of his face, which you didn't. And then finally, if you look at this angle here, again, imagine door here, gun in this thing, then even if, and I think there's no evidence of it, but even if the shot could go through Paul's head and create an exit pathway, then that would project whatever pellets and bone matter that way. Whereas, if you move the shooter to the other side and we shoot into Paul downward this way, then all of this material comes back at the shooter, but also it's going this way into that upper corner, which is where we see the pellet defects and the heavy blood and the hair.
I was going to, okay, you'll take a seat, that'd be great.
Thank you.
Thank you. You can take that down, Doug. Mr. Palmbach, let's talk a little bit about the reconstruction of murder of Maggie Murdaugh. Did you assess the crime scene as it relates to her?
I did.
And what your observations?
Well, generally, there's a couple really key observations. One, all of her wounds were facing the direction of the shooter. So at all times during this, her shooting, she's facing the shooter. Now, she is moving, for sure. There is some degree of movement, from where the initial shooting most likely occurred, which is, we can't give you an accurate estimation for that. We can give you a really good estimation where it ended, and that's where we find her. And I'll talk about which wounds were associated with that in a minute. But so you have her facing the attacker the entire time. At no point did she turn or blade or anything other than face him, and moved a little bit in the area, although not much. And then the shooter based on the overall distribution of the shell casings, also moved, again, somewhat, moving, toward where the ultimate location where we find Maggie.
I'm going to show you two photos. Defense Exhibit 163 and 164, and ask if you relied upon those. Ricky, your conclusion?
I did.
Your Honor, we move Defense Exhibit 163 and 64 into evidence at this time without objection.
No objection.
Committed.
If you don't mind pulling out 163, Doug. Thank you. And jury's seen this, but just give us an overview of what this is.
Well, so Maggie is underneath the blanket there, and she's in a face-down position there.
Just leave it like that, don't it?
Her head is more toward us, and her feet are pointing more toward, I think what's been identified as a doghouse.
Right.
You'll see placards in the foreground, 3 and 4, which are two of the blackout 300 casings. You'll see a placard 12, which is over on the grass, more in alignment. We're heading more toward Maggie's head area, and that was a large piece of what appears to be brain-like material. And while you can't see the numbering, there are additional placards to the left, immediately to the left side. Well, they're on Maggie's right side, but as we view the photograph, they're to the left of where she's currently located. So this just gives us some general orientation of approximate locations of the shooter, and certainly where at least the fatal shot to Maggie was taken.
Right. I'm going to show you Defense Exhibit 149. And the other two, we'd move to those be under seal and 149 under seal. Is this, you relied upon this in reaching your conclusions?
I did.
Your Honor, we move, Exhibit 194, not 149. 194 into evidence under seal at this time.
No objection.
Committed.
And if you don't mind pulling up, Doug, well, before I do that, let's go to 164, and which is a closer up area around the side-by-side, as they call it. What's the significance of this photo?
Again, I think this is an area in which Maggie passed by during this incident. It's also an area that's being highlighted now where what appears to be a damaged loop earring, which is consistent in shape and design and structure to the one that's still in her right ear. This one would have come out of her left ear at the time of that impact, a shot to her left ear, and more or less just been blown over destruction.
And the jury has seen the autopsy photo of the injury to her left ear. Is this do you believe this earring is a byproduct of that injury?
I do.
Okay. And then just briefly, I'm going to pull up 194 and ask if you can just generally, I think you were hair on her body. What significance is that? And if you'll blow up her legs.
Right.
Doug, please.
So, when you find a body, you always have to wonder, is that really the position that the body remained in? Or, through medical, maybe the defendant did, or the accused or the shooter did something to the body. More likely, in a medical evaluation, they did something to it. We always just want to know, are we looking at it in the right orientation? Did somebody flip it over and whatnot? And so I think it was valuable in this case, to have seen that injury in the back of her head, the massive amount of hair that came off of that. And then if you look close up on the back of her legs, you'll see just dozens and dozens of hairs laying on top of her legs, which would be a good indicator that she didn't get moved. That we can count on this being the final position, unaltered position of Maggie.
Doug, can you go back to 163? Oh, you mentioned a marker 12 a moment ago in 163, and again, what do you understand 12 to be?
It's physiological material. I mean, it looks structurally like brain material, but it's tissue.
In your opinion, would the shooter of Maggie have any blood spatter, blood, biological material on him or her?
I think it's possible. I think it's possible because, as we're seeing here, that you have a projection of brain material backwards toward the direction of where the shooter would have been located. We also have a couple of the shots, the left thigh shot and the abdomen shot, which have been identified as having stippling around them. By virtue of being stippling, that does make it an intermediate distance, and that's going to move the shooter in anywhere from, I would agree, I think Dr. Einstein said a foot to 3 feet is probably a good approximation.
Okay. Mr. Palmbach, do you have an opinion based upon more probably than not, whether there was one or two shooters who murdered Maggie and Paul on the night of June 7th?
I do have an opinion on that.
And what's your opinion?
My opinion is the totality of the evidence is more suggestive of a two-shooter scenario.
And please explain the basis of your opinion.
Okay, so we'll go back to Paul. In Paul's scenario, we know where the shooter of the shotgun had to be, and that would have been orientated really directly over Paul's head. And we also got a chance to see what was the effect of this dynamic explosion in the contact. And you can see outside and even in throughout the feet area in multiple and many large pieces of skull. We also saw large amounts of tissue that were projected all the way up onto the ceiling and the door. You see hair all the way up into the door, and of course you see blood literally everywhere within there. And finally, you see the pellets. Some of the pellets are on that same pathway, and they had enough inertia to either or dent the door and put themselves up and stick into the casing. All of that activity was in direct alignment with the shooter. And so I think minimally, that shooter is getting covered with this material, getting more or less the shock wave of that effect, and more than likely getting hit with at least something that could have done injury, a bone fragment and or a pellet fragment. Therefore, I think that particular shooter, for a brief period of time, is kind of out of this. It's not as if they could instantaneously suffer that, drop the shotgun, run to wherever the blackout rifle is, pick that up, and then in any kind of a reasonable time period engage in a meaningful assault, an effective assault, able to shoot straight and make hits. So that, I think, is one of the major indicators of concern. I think the other things to consider is that all of this is very temporal. It's very close. I know when I looked at the photographs versus being there, I'm like, it is much closer together than it looks like in the photo. So it is happening very close. With Paul, as I articulated, I believe he was shot first. I believe he had no idea it was coming. And he took the shot to the chest and very soon thereafter the one in the back of his head. Anybody in the near proximity to that, if Maggie had been anywhere in that area walking around down there, she would have heard that. And her response would have been in the direction of the shooter or the activity, or run, or do something different. So I think that the temporal location suggests that these things more probable than not happened fairly quickly, and that the individual who shot first with the shotgun minimally was stunned, probably blood and material in his eyes, and maybe have been injured, and would have taken some degree of time to recover. And lastly, I think there is just more or less anybody who deals with firearms, a logical argument here. Why would one shooter bring two long rifles, two long weapons to the event? You can't handle and shoot two of them. So you either got to put one down, use one, and then swap out and grab the other one, or I suppose you could have one on a sling, but that's quite awkward, and it's slipping around and it's banging around in an environment we know is very, very tight. Finally, if one of the weapons is the Blackout 300, well, that comes with a high magazine capacity. My research of that showed that the Palmetto State Armory upper, which we don't know, we have no idea what gun this is because it hasn't been identified, but if the state, I think, has alluded to that, if that's the case, then a weapon that had that Palmetto State Armory in a 300 Blackout, a person could purchase a 10-round capacity clip, a 20-round capacity clip, or a 30-round capacity clip. Where I live in Connecticut, we are really restrictive on what kind of weapons we can have and what kind of clips we could have. We'd have to, even if we could have an AR, which is very restrictive, we'd have to get a 10-round clip. Other than that, it wouldn't make sense for anybody to buy a 10-round clip when you could buy a 20 or 30. But having said that, if it was a 10-round clip, there were only 8 shots fired. You still had 2 more to go, and you could have more than not easily reloaded. So to me, there's structurally difficult for the same shooter to have 2 long arms and no practical reason for that to happen. Add that to what I believe happened to the shooter who fired first with the shotgun, and I think it tips in favor of the probability of 2 shooters.
Mr. Palmbach, this person who shot Paul, was he or she standing in the feed room at least 1 foot?
Yes.
Was there an opportunity to do a footprint analysis to illuminate more clearly the existence of footprints there?
For sure. I mean, all of us, I mean, several, I can speak for myself, and I believe others have opined about this, including some of the analysts in the case. There are what appear to be partial footprints in blood in the feed room and on the cement around it. And while I'm not a footwear pattern expert, I can generally recognize what appears to be footwear or partial footwear impressions. I would agree with that. But in order to go beyond it's a general pattern to something more specific, that generally what you do, and I've done this countless times, is you spray enhancement reagents on them. And you spray a reagent, we generally call them blood pattern enhancement reagent, or you could even use a straight protein spray. Amidio black would be an example of one of those. And by spraying those reagents in the area, it reacts with the presence of blood or proteins, and it brings up the transformation. It gives you a lot more clarity, a lot more detail, and you can tell an awful lot more about a particular footwear pattern. Absolutely should have been done in this case. And I also believe, second to that, you had a lot of dirt in the immediate area that should have had at least partial footwear impressions, and I saw no indication of any attempt to either look for it, photograph it, properly photograph it, or analyze it.
And thank you. One moment, Your Honor. And Mr. Palmbach, did you see any fingerprint analysis or attempts to obtain fingerprints from the feed room area?
I did not.
Could you have used reagents like you described to enhance fingerprints, or is that a whole different methodology?
Well, if you thought that the fingerprints could contain blood, which maybe they usually could have, then yes, you could also use those reagents to enhance partially or fully bloody fingerprints. But I think you could also use basic fingerprint processing techniques on the door and any surface in the area. Since we know this is a very confined area and the shooter has to be in that general area, and the possibility of touching something is there. I mean, I think it would have been wise to look for that.
Thank you. That's all I have. Please answer any questions the state may have.
By the state.
Dr. Palmbach?
No, ma'am.
Oh, this Mr.
I'm not a
Palmbach?
doctor.
Okay, I want to get it right. Now, you said you were hired by the defense to, 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 to investigate and come up with your own conclusions here. And you just got the chance to go out to Moselle, was it last Friday?
That's correct.
And so between last Friday and today, you've had the chance to determine all of these things you've testified about?
No, before I arrived here, everything else was predetermined, and I had done all the work in the analysis. What I didn't know or didn't perceive was these 2 pellets and the fact that the energy was able to project 2 pellets upward. That was the only new information to me.
And you form your opinion by reviewing reports and things that were provided to you by the defense?
Correct.
Do you know if you reviewed the entire case file?
No, I wouldn't know that.
You just reviewed materials that were provided to you?
Correct.
Did you prepare any kind of report?
I did not.
You did not?
Correct.
But you did review reports made by Dr. Kenny Kinsey and a pathologist and other witnesses for the state?
I did.
All right, let's talk about the feed room a little bit. You testified a lot about that. Now, you said the shooter stepped in the feed room, could have stepped in the feed room to shoot Paul in the back of the head.
Correct.
And when he would have shot Paul, he would have been covered in blood.
As a result of the backspatter from the headshot, yes.
Covered in blood.
Yes.
And in the picture of the feed room, were there any other bloody footprints clearly apparent?
Any other?
Yes,
Other than what?
other than Paul's footprints.
Well, all I've seen is partial footprints that have been observed in the feed room. I've yet to read a report that said conclusively they were Paul's.
I'm going to show you states 27. And there has been testimony that those footprints we're looking at do belong to Paul Murdaugh. Were there any other clearly visible footprints that you can see in that picture from a bloody shooter?
So first of all, and again, I am not a footwear examiner, so I'm not going to make a determination about whether or not it definitively is Paul Murdaugh's shoe. All of the reports I've read generated by the state, the ones that I've seen, would say that they didn't exclude it, but that also does not mean that it's Paul's. Now, I'm not disagreeing that it doesn't maybe have some characteristics in similar, but I don't know that they're even at a point where that has been fully identified as Paul's.
So you haven't seen the report that identified those as Paul's footprints?
Definitively identified as Paul's? No, I did not.
You only saw the reports the defense wanted you to see?
I got the reports that were supplied to me, yes.
Now about the damage to the door, we saw this picture where there's blood in the corner of the door frame. And that was the defense's exhibit. Defense exhibit 165. And I think we were emphasizing the blood in the right corner, the bottom of the door frame there.
Yes.
Were there any defects from pellets in the door frame down there?
Not that I saw.
There's defects from the top of the door, right?
That is correct.
And you referred to Paul being shot in the back of the head, kind of like an explosion.
Correct.
And I'm not a physicist or anything here, but when you fire a shotgun, things are going in a direction that the gun is fired, right?
Correct.
So there wouldn't be just like a boom explosion like from a bomb when you fire a shotgun.
Actually, that's more exactly what it would be like, yes.
So you're saying a shotgun, when you fire it, the impact is all around like a bomb instead of in the direction the gun is fired?
Only when you confine it. And again, and that's why it makes the classical determination of a contact wound in something like the cranium. It's not, you shoot a person anywhere else, you will not trap the gaseous material and allow the pressure to build up within eventually, yeah, it doesn't look like a bomb going off. That only happens in a cranial vault.
So if there was an explosion of this type, wouldn't Paul's whole head be blown off?
I'd say the fact that his entire brain came out and a large portion of his skull is missing, that's pretty dynamic. I don't know how much more you want.
But his brain wasn't destroyed, was it?
There were pieces of his brain throughout the room, and including out on the ground.
Most of his brain was intact, right?
The majority of the structure was physically together, but whether it was injured is absolutely not for me to decide. That's a pathologist that needs to do that.
I believe you testified that his brain was a mass on the ground,
Yes.
and his face wasn't destroyed either from this explosion, was it?
No, because again, the energy source is going to find the easiest egress, and that is where the entrance hole came. So that's why none of that explosive value did not go down with the shot, which is the kind of the logical inference that all should come this way or his left. But in this capacity, because this is in this seal vault, this is this large hole there, then you get kind of a shift, and all of this now starts pushing back that way, following the exit point out the entrance hole.
And you're talking about pushing up, but the shooter was firing down?
The explosive release of the gas trapped in the cranial will push back upward in the direction of where the barrel was. Absolutely, some of the projectile and energy has gone through the brain, exited the left side of the face, and into the shoulder, and created exactly that pattern that you were pointing to a minute ago on the door jamb.
So all these pellets that were being pushed downward when they were shot, we don't have any defects downward, just upward.
Correct.
Okay.
Anything further? You may step down. We will break for lunch now till 2:45, till 2:45. Jury is excused. At 2:45, do you have another witness?
One more.
All right, we'll be in recess till 2:45.